This being Tuesday, September 27th at 6:35. My name is Linda Vacan. I'm the Ward 5 City Councilor and Chair. To my left is Councilor Jose Maldonado Velez, Vice Chair and City Councilor at Large. To his left is Councilor Rivera, City Councilor at Large. To my right is Councilor Kevin Jourdain, City Councilor at Large. I'm not sure about our fifth member. She may be arriving shortly. I don't see, you see her on Zoom? Oh, okay, I see Cocaine GIVNER on the Zoom. So we have a full committee. Can you hear me, Councilor GIVNER?
Can you speak?
Can we hear you?
No.
I can't hear you. Are you muted? I just want to make sure we can hear you.
No.
Okay, so we cannot hear you in the chambers at the moment, and I'm sure they will work on trying to resolve that. In the meantime, Councilor GIVNER, if you want to participate in discussion, would it be possible for you to text to my phone? I mean, I know it's awkward, but I don't want you to be out of discussion because we don't have sound.
We're working on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just doing interim. So, and I see we have Counselor McGivern on Zoom with us also. And I see that we have Attorney Degnan on the Zoom. And I think that's everybody. If I miss anybody, I apologize. Okay. So they,
Happened to me last week, and then Kevin wanna start a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
so members on Zoom, we cannot hear you at this time, but they are working on resolving that problem. Okay. So I'd like to entertain a motion to take up item 1.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
So item 1 is a petition from Yahaira Malero for a street vendor license. It was tabled August 23rd, but we had a communication from her at that time that she had personal issues, and we haven't had further communication since. So what I'd like to do is table it to give her an opportunity.
I guess what there's Joe say, we can't start the meeting until Zoom is able to join.
It happened to me last week,
Well, we're only going to table it.
because yeah, I get.
We can table it.
Table this one
Yeah.
and we'll just wait and
Because
We'll, yeah,
because of the public hearing, they gotta do.
right, but we're not even, the planning board's not even here yet. So we're only tabling this, so I think we're in proper order to table it.
second.
All in favor? Aye, and we have to do roll call vote, so, because Counselor GIVNER's on Zoom. So,
Can we do a motion for
I'll-
that, or it's only certain things? Because I think we did that last week.
yeah. Okay, so Counselor GIVNER is yes. Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Velez?
Yes.
Linda Vacan, yes. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Okay, so item 1 is tabled, and we'll wait for the audio to be resolved for the joint hearing. We were doing so well for so long. I know, but I know. But we were doing so well for so long, I don't understand why we're running into these glitches now. Must be security issues.
Coco, can you play some music in your background so so we can hear the music come through if it does start?
Do they test these things before the meeting?
They were, and
Jeffrey's calling.
I mean, I could see when it's a new issue, but if it's the same issue, right, it's kind of a problem.
hi, Jeffrey.
So Scott is just about to arrive home, and he's going to remote in on his computer and see what the issue is with Zoom, with you not, or with Zoom not hearing you, or with you not hearing Zoom.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, should be just a minute or two.
Okay. Bye.
The bottom up in this one?
Jeff did something last week, accidentally made it work. I don't know what it was, but it worked. That's what I got.
You don't know what made it work?
He didn't know, I don't think, he was like, whoa, whoa, they called him and did this, whoa, whoa. and
But
it
was
worked.
it on this computer they did something?
Move back there. It's because that guy Scott was doing the school committee. And I was like, don't we blame him? Why is he doing the school committee stuff? On the same time as my meeting.
So if you couldn't hear him, Scott's coming in at remotely to see if he can
He's
resolve
gonna
it.
remote into that computer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm taking a class on e-gutter.
Leave my mic on, Jeff can hear us. Oh. So,
Like
Why
10.
did I say like we have audio issues?
well, because,
We have
so,
audio issues. We can't send you that message. We have audio issues.
so,
You can just proceed with your agenda
Yes.
until we get back.
We'll do that.
right.
Hey, okay, I like that. You got a little name.
So,
Can someone on Zoom speak?
Sure. Hello? Hello?
We're connected.
we have audio.
Yay. Woo!
It's up
Yay! All
Well-
right, now,
What, we can go out of order, but I would defer to your chair.
Mimi, would you mind, they don't mind going out of order. We could go back up and finish with Gary Rome and let them get out of there and
yeah.
the ordinance
no,
can
I would
proceed.
be very happy to do that.
We're fine
Okay,
with that.
we'll
I'm
be-
right,
we'll be back.
committee? Yes, yes.
Okay,
Thank you, Mimi, we'll see you up in the room.
thanks, bye.
Okay. Okay, see you in a bit. All right, so I will entertain a motion to take up item 4 and
So-
open the public hearing.
Motion to take up item 4 and open up the public hearing.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Do we have to do roll call? to go back to the agenda?
Yeah, because she's remote.
Okay, so roll call. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Velez?
Yes.
Yes.
Rivera? Givner?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor? So that's a yes, and we now have item 4 before us. Item 4 is a public hearing continued many times to amend the zoning ordinance to read any home construction in a residential zone shall be greater than 50% living space. A special permit from city council is required if the home construction will have 50% or less living space. Recently, home plans have been approved, and it has been communicated from the building commissioner that our current residential zoning allows for construction of a home that is 80% garage and 20% living space. So we've had a number of public hearings, and we've gotten input from our legal department, which was forwarded to planning, and our planning board has sent us 2 communications on this matter. So the initial communication was relative to state law that says the interior space can't be controlled in local ordinance, and the state law stipulates certain minimum square footage. I'm only saying that because I went and read it. But our attorney raised a question when we sought legal advice that because there's external requirements relative to how a lot is used, that perhaps that might impact on the internal measurements, which it would apparently, as the discussion went on, it would impact on the whole size of the building as I'm understanding it, but not necessarily on the percentage of what was garage or what was something else. So Attorney Degnan, is the explanation, the summary that I just gave, accurate?
Good evening, councilors. Yes, it is, Councilor Bacon. That's absolutely what it says.
Okay, all right. So in light of that and in light of the second clarification, and I do thank Attorney Degnan for looking into it further and raising the further questions because it can get complicated. I would just note that the whole question came up because the building commissioner said it was 20% living space and 80% garage, which I'd never heard of. So now we know a lot more about this than we did before. But is there any member of the public on Zoom, not seeing anybody in the chambers, that wishes to speak on this matter at all? Not seeing any, not hearing any. I would say at this point, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing for item 4.
Second?
All in favor, Counsel Rivera?
Yes.
Counsel Velez?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Jourdain?
Yes.
Givner?
Yes.
Okay, so on that motion, the public hearing is closed. Relative to the order, it appears that we cannot change the percentage because it's not how it's driven. So at this point, I guess, hang on, because it's a zoning matter, the planning board has recommended, I believe, that we deny it as a change. So I think that we need to follow through on it as an approval or a denial at this point, right? I mean,
Can we
as
amend
a
it
matter of process. Well, if
to
I'm,
another remedy? Based on, does the law department have a recommendation? I think they can see what we're trying to achieve here.
yeah, I don't know.
The purpose is, my concern, Madam Chair, is that it would appear that someone has found a loophole, or potentially has found a loophole, and we need to close the loophole so that it's in keeping with the character of the other homes. Obviously, the other homeowners are looking for us to protect their investment and the character of the residential character of the neighborhood, so that somebody doesn't put up a garage and then put a bed in the back of the garage and call it a house.
Yeah. So Attorney Degnan, under this order, is there any other remedy that we might have, or would I need to file a different order?
I understand what Councilor Jourdain is saying, but at first blush, I think you need to do another order, because my concern is we don't want to have this be a zoning change, because as you said, there's a process that we have to follow to do that. So, and I wish I had some suggestions for you right now, but I do not. I think that it's probably better for this to be denied and perhaps file a different order.
Okay, thank you.
I have the floor.
Counselor Jourdain.
Rather than having a shooting in the dark, and you file an order like this and it be denied because this isn't the proper remedy, and then you'll file something else and that won't be the proper remedy. Our goal here is not to play darts with the dartboard. Our goal is to legislate. So I would recommend that between the building department and the law department that they draft up, they clearly see what you're attempting to do, which is common sense, and you're trying to protect the neighbors and the residential character of the neighborhood. I would recommend that they use their collective wisdom to see what can be done, give that to you, file it, and then we have a public hearing. Does that seem reasonable?
I am willing to have conversations with the building commissioner, who I see is joining by virtue of Zoom. I am willing to have that discussion.
Okay, I didn't realize the building commissioner was with us, but, so, what I would like to do, I think, is entertain a motion to deny the zone change, but also request to the building commissioner and to Attorney Dagnan that they could perhaps provide the council with some remedies or some suggestions to how we might ensure the residential character of the residential agriculture zone in specific and the residential zone in general.
And if I may, Madam Chair, after we have this discussion, and perhaps if zoning is the remedy, it might be that we come back and say, look, we see what you want to do. Maybe we need to make a zoning change, and that coming back, then maybe the procedure, I mean, would that be something that would be, if we determine that's the remedy?
Yes, I'm just understanding from the quotation of the state law that the interior can't be affected. I guess the remaining question I have is whether the living space compared to non-living space has any other application.
Madam Chair?
But
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that would be my only other question, but what I'm understanding so far is that interior is interior regardless of whether it's living or not living. So I don't see a remedy within this as I crafted it. Councilor Rivera?
Yeah, just so that I can grasp the concept here, right? Because I remember we spoke on this several times already. There was different public hearings. So are we trying to prevent people that are buying land to build something that they want to build, more or less, if it doesn't fit the facade of the neighborhood?
The point is, want me to take a crack at that? It's a good question.
Yeah, no, yeah.
I think he's
Well, I have a
he's asking a
follow-up.
question.
I have
You have the floor.
I have a follow-up, but like it's just because I think society, or at least some of the people in our communities or in the neighboring communities, are moving more towards like a tiny home type of concept. There are things down the pipeline, right? And I think that if we do tiny homes and we're doing like smaller spaces, then you're probably gonna get larger garage space because of that, because they need somewhere to store their stuff, right? So in a sense, whatever we're doing now might later on down the road prevent something that we're trying to try to do
Okay.
in different projects. So like I would like to, I mean, I'm not against it, right? But I feel like if the whole neighborhood could create an association or something like that and come together as a whole neighborhood, that might actually have more ground in the court of law than just us as city councilors fighting them, like trying to do that.
So I'll answer it one way, and then I'll give the floor to Councilor Jourdain. The concern is not that somebody not be able to have a home the way they want it. The concern is that somebody is essentially creating a commercial property in a residential zone.
Oh, that's different. That is different.
That's the concern, the use.
Have we asked the person that's building it? what it is, the plan?
Well, they've been approved for plans for a home, and they do meet the minimum requirements, and they understand the requirements.
So
and
then,
have met them.
so then I think for us is
As
just,
far as,
yeah, I think for us is just doing our due diligence.
as far as the plan
Right.
indicates.
Right, just making sure
Home
that they,
isn't built yet.
no, it's just making sure that they continue doing what they say they're doing, right? Running an actual home out of that instead of an actual commercial business.
What about the one that is built?
Counselor Jourdain,
about
is partially built.
Oh. My concern is one of, and again, it's about protecting people's investment here, right? Beautiful home. Has a normal, 1, 2, 3-car garage, maybe 4-car garage. Home that is consistent with that. Next to it, another home that is consistent with that, and another home, and another home. I mean, and you can have one's a ranch, and one's a colonial, one's a bungalow. I mean, no issues with all that. But when you have what appears to be 3 giant bay garage doors, and you really have de minimis really residential space, okay, this is 90% garage and 10% house. Now it looks ridiculous in the neighborhood with all the other homes, and now people are going to be like, well, hold on again, this is my next door neighbor, and I have to, this isn't what I bought into. I bought into a residential neighborhood. So people are potentially gaming the rules here and finding loopholes that we want to deal with. Now, it's interesting about the tiny home. Yeah, you're right. And that also gets into the question of multiple homes on the same property, right? But I think what I don't preach to be an expert on tiny home, but I have read and looked into it, and the trend of it is very minimalist tend to be the people who do this. I don't think you'll see too many situations where the little tiny home person comes in and asks for a giant 3-car garage. You're probably not like that. They tend to be people who are more minimalist and conservative in their orientation about material stuff. They don't keep tons of that kind of stuff. That's kind of the whole point. But yeah, I mean, I think we should have a potential to encourage that, or to have, if there's a big enough lot, could a person have a regular house, but maybe their children want to have, a tiny house or something, 400 square foot type of thing.
That's the front of the house. It's now got all the garage doors. I'm just showing a picture to the committee of the pre-finished.
Would you like to share the address so that we can all look?
I mean,
It is, hang on.
and if I may, Madam Chair, so like and just looking at, I mean, the picture and passing by, if it becomes something like that where it's a 3-bay port garage thing, like, yeah, I would be concerned too as well. You know what I mean? Like, there are other situations with that are arising that kind of have the same kind of aesthetic in a sense that we might have to talk about in the future. But like, the idea is, like, I just don't know if someone comes to Holyoke that has the money to buy and then build some crazy home up, because you guys have a lot of land in Ward 5 and Ward 6 up there. So it's like, if you get people that come and they invest as much as they can and they have like a huge home, it would kind of be cool, right? But at the same time, it would be different for us, right? Because that's not something that not new homes. Most of the homes that you see that are huge mansions are the old school homes. They've been around for a long time, but a new home, that would be something interesting to explore too as well. But I just wanted to.
Right, and in this particular situation, what caught my attention was the fact that the living space has a bed that folds down from the wall. It is so minimal. And so I'm just concerned in that regard. But I understand, Counselor GIVNER, I think the number is 200-something County Road.
I had another question.
You have the floor, Counselor GIVNER.
Oh, thank you. So, I can't help but wonder if we're talking about an ordinance about the 50-50 living space, or if we're talking about neighborhood aesthetics. Because I think if we're talking about neighborhood aesthetics, we have a whole different conversation to attack. And I don't think that any kind of percentage of living space in a home on a property is gonna cover that. You know, if what we're talking about is not liking the idea of a garage-like looking structure as our neighbor, we have to figure out a way to make every neighborhood in Holyoke historic, right? So I guess I'm a little confused about what our intention is as a committee at this point, or if we're just approving or disapproving of the 50-50 space.
So we are simply approving or disapproving relative to the order on the change in the ordinance of the space. And I've acknowledged on the record that the advice and the information that we have received says that we would not be in compliance with state law were we to do that. As a part of the discussion, a question was raised as to what was the concern relative to the order being filed. And we got into a tangent, and yes, some of it was on aesthetics, but the main concern was the use and the appearance of a commercial use in a residential zone. To which...
Appearance.
Well, to the extent that the building commissioner has written a letter to the owner advising them that they can't use it as a commercial use because apparently the building commissioner had some concerns in that regard as well. So I was just explaining the origination of it. But having said all that, pardon?
Damien is here as well, please.
But having said all that, it's clear on the legal side of things that as this order is written, that I believe the proper motion would be to deny the zone change based on the law at this time, based on what we have learned.
Madam Chair,
Counselor Givner?
just to be clear, so that was that's the recommendation by the planning board and our building commissioner, right?
Yes, is my understanding.
Okay.
But the official recommendation comes from the planning board, and that is their recommendation.
Okay.
But I did want to make one point, though, because,
Jourdain.
yeah, I'm happy to support the motion to deny. But to Counselor Givner's point, the issue is when people go wildly outside the norms of structures to game the rules, it becomes an effect upon all the other neighbors who are living. And therefore, this is the intersection of the issue between neighborhood aesthetics and building codes. It's why we don't allow people to put up 5-story homes. You know, we have setback requirements. We have all these dimensional controls to make people play by a certain set of ground rules amongst all of us, and we do those in good faith between each other as neighbors. So when we see something that falls between the cracks, we do our best to push everybody back into the conformities of good neighborhood, and being good neighbors to each other. And I think we're trying to come up with a solution that's reasonable for everybody involved.
Right, and
This just didn't turn out to be the way to do it.
the right path.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So the goal may have been in keeping, but the remedy is not proper.
Correct. So motion to deny, Madam Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so the motion has been made to deny, and so we need to do the roll call. Counselor Givner?
Yes.
A yes is to deny.
Yes.
Yes.
Jourdain?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Maldonado, Velez?
Yes.
Rivera?
Yes.
Yes. So that is a 5-0 vote to deny the zone change based on the legal recommendation that we can't do it in accordance with state law. And I would still like to leave the request out to legal and our building commissioner to, now that the concern is understood, if there can be some assistance brought forth so that perhaps I could file an order that would properly address the concern relative to use in a residential zone. Thank you. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to take
Motion
up
to take
item,
up item 5.
or unless you want to go to another one. 5 really goes with a
With,
couple others, right?
Food truck zone.
Um,
So we can
We
wait.
could go to 6.
Motion to take up item 6.
Second.
All in favor? Counselor GIVNER? This is to take up the item. Jourdain?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Velez?
Yes.
Rivera? Yes. So we now have item 6 before us. Item 6 is a zone change application from DR to BH for Daniel LaFlamme at 41 Temple Street to operate a truck repair shop in a district zone DR so that the business can be conforming. The public hearing was closed on August 23rd. We took in a lot of information. We explored a variety of pathways and avenues, and we heard one or two different historical paths of attempted action by the owner relative to getting or keeping the property in compliance, which was a rather convoluted path with some unclear records brought into the hearing. So, long story short, after all the paths were investigated, we are left with the application that is before us as the only option for us to properly consider at this time. There were other ideas brought up, but under this particular order, what we see before us at the end of the day is what we have to decide about. Now, for my part, I've learned a lot about zoning over the last number of years, and I think we are informed on zoning from a legal perspective, from a functional perspective, and from an economic perspective, as well as our history within the city, which is unique in many circumstances. So for my part, what I find is that the owner of the property did take steps to try to cure any questions about the use. There remain some questions about the use, but what is not in question is that the applicant is seeking to operate a truck repair shop on the property for which he would need the BH zone. Those things have been confirmed. So for me, we're looking at a property owner who's owned the property for, in my recollection, 10 years. If we don't find a way to allow the person to comply as he has sought to do over the years, then we are potentially creating an empty and blighted building in the area. So for me, I am going to vote in support of this petition. I understand there is a narrow legal opinion in regards to it, but I think we have a long history, and within, I believe, 6 doors, we have another business entity. So there's the summary. There's my perspective on it, and so we're in discussion. And Councilor Rivera, I see you want to be recognized.
I just want to clarify something. If we don't support this, there is no way for them to come back and apply for a special permit?
Correct. Because in the public
Because they should have
hearing-
did that in the first time?
So in the public hearing, and now I'm going from memory, and any member can jump in if you find I'm inaccurate. During the public hearing, the property owner shared with us that he had applied for a special permit. And that had occurred back in shortly after he bought the property. For reasons that we do not know, there was a hearing held by this committee, not us, but this committee. And then for some reason, after that hearing was held, the property owner gave his request for a special permit leave to withdraw. Now, the only times I've ever seen that done, but this is speculation on my part, is when somebody has advised them that they should do that, because they apply for a special permit because they understand that's the way to do what they need to do. So, but that is speculation, and I've seen it happen in at least 1 or 2 other circumstances.
So for me, I guess for me, the problem kind of lies in what you guys were kind of like referring to in the last order, right? Where it's like a residential neighborhood, and then we're gonna have commercial business in a predominantly residential neighborhood. I literally drove by there like a couple of days ago, the place is a cool business and it looks all right, but it doesn't fit literally with the neighborhood, like Councilor Jourdain kind of just like referred to in the last one, right? Where it's like it doesn't fit with the aesthetic of the neighborhood. It doesn't fit with the neighborhood, with the neighbors' homes, right? Because it's literally 4 bays, 3 bays, and they're doing work there. I wish we could support them in any way possible, right? But like to turn it to a whole BH, that's literally spot zoning. And for me, I'm not cool with the spot zoning. Like I don't know how else to explain it. So it's like, to me, like how do we go through the process to try to help this person get a possible special permit? Like the idea is what, because it came up once a long time ago and it never got spoken on, we can't bring it back?
No, so.
But like, to me, it's like changing it to BH, that's forever. And that one little spot.
So when it was raised in the public hearing, whether the person could come in for a special permit, we were advised by legal in the public hearing that because it's zoned DR, that a special permit is not allowable for that use in that zone. What we also learned in the public hearing is that much of the residential that exists right around that now business bay, which we all know was always a bay and it was always a business, right, was built after the bay and the business was there, similar to the one down the road that currently exists in a business zone.
But the bay was recently remodeled.
Well, that may be true.
You know what I mean? It
That
looks
may
like
be
a house
true.
now. It doesn't actually look like a building. It looks
Yeah.
like a real. It kind of fits like it fits like a house,
Yeah.
but just like to keep. I mean, to the aesthetic of the neighborhood, they did the best they could to stay within the neighborhood. I respect that and I give it 100% credit. But for me, it's like the whole putting the BH thing there. Like, if he decides to sell in 10 years, we have no control over that. And then the next person that comes in line, we kind of have somewhat of a say of what we can do, but BH opens a whole new ball court, at least to what
Well-
I'm understanding.
Well, and I do hear you on that. I think the argument relative to the appearance of it is similar to the discussion that we just had on the zone change in the residential zone that we just talked about. It looks commercial.
That's what I'm saying.
It's in a residential zone.
That's what I'm saying.
But it's allowed, and the person is building it.
But we don't know if it's going to be a business, and if it's a business, he should not run.
Well,
Right?
Well, right.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
If,
more or less.
but I would only say that this space, this building, was never a house. It can never be a house. And it was pre-existing in its form. I mean, and that's just a perspective. Because if it isn't used for what it's being used for, what will it ever be able to be used for?
A house.
So, Counselor GIVNER, you want to be recognized?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note that I think there's kind of a big difference between the last two discussions, just because this is a business in a residential neighborhood, whereas the other one looks like a business in a residential neighborhood. And the other one cannot be a business, even if it looks like one. But this is a case where if there were a way to grandfather this person in, I think that would make the most sense. Because clearly he's been operating this business and
For 10 years, right?
he's been operating and there've been, similar businesses operating there before him. So I continue to wonder if there's a way to grandfather this person into a business somehow without changing the zoning, because I hate to punish him when it seems like he did try to do all the right things, but I also just don't feel like, I feel like that neighborhood down there has been turning into more residential, even if it was more commercial, 50 years ago. But as it becomes more residential, I don't think it's really fair to the neighbors there either to kind of try to force it to be commercial permanently. I don't know. I think this is a very strange case.
Well,
Thank you.
and I would agree, and I'll recognize Counselor Maldonado Velez momentarily. But I do want to share, and remind the committee that within the last 2 years, we did approve a spot zone. And we approved the spot zone in a situation that had a strong majority of support from the neighborhood. Pardon? Well, I'm saying, but what I'm putting it out there, it did happen. The neighbors came in, they were in support of it. It was a business building that was never a house and was never going to be a house. And it was a spot zone, and it was approved. So I think this is a very comparable situation to that. So, we may like it, we may not like it as a concept, but I'm simply noting for the record that it has happened within the last couple of years. Councilor Maldonado Velez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it just makes me think, so I'm putting wrapping my head around putting sort of the same reasoning around with this as with the church, Pleasant and Hamden, when we just put it into a BH zone. So my yes for that one was the simple fact that if Dennis, who was the petitioner for that zone change, were to something were to happen tomorrow, I'd be okay with that specific spot being a BH. With this one, it just does not feel right for it to be a BH because, again, if God forbid something happens to Mr. LaFlame tomorrow, that means that that zone is BH and anyone else can come in and possibly use it for whatever is listed under BH. I think this, though, is not Mr. LaFlame's problem. This is definitely our issue. I think this is just a symptom of like the problem that we have in our city as far as like communication, making sure that people are knowing and sure as far as like zoning and what's allowed and whatnot. So the line that sticks out for me is pre-existing non-conforming use, which would allow him to continue to operate within his existing zone. So my question, I guess through legal, if anyone knows, is like, who determines what is the pre-existing non-conforming use? Like, are we as a body the ones to determine that? Because if it is, then in this case, I was sort of like going along with Councilor GIVNER, where it's like, I'm okay with Mr. LaFlame doing this just because of like how long it's been, which a decade, that's way too long for something to be operating illegally and then all of a sudden not this, but also, protect the neighbors because you mentioned, the people in the neighborhood are okay with this being a beige zone, but we also so how do we give the people what they want, which is in that case wasn't BH zone, was more of like keeping Mr. LaFlame there to help them with snow plowing and all these other things, but also protect the city without having it be a BH zone. Spot zoning for me, I think it's another issue, but I think it's more of like, how do we make sure Mr. LaFlame is protected here?
Yeah, okay. Do you want, so Attorney Dagnan, could you speak to Councilor Maldonado Velez's concern at all?
Yeah, when you're talking about grandfathering and there's a zoning law, and it's about if you abandon the use for more than 2 years, you're no longer protected. And there was a big issue with this because Madam Chair when she started out, it's correct. There was a lot of discussion. I know Attorney Wilson came on a couple of occasions. I asked Attorney Wilson for some documentary evidence so that we could determine whether or not it's pre-existing non-conforming. I did not receive anything from that, just the bankruptcy papers, which I knew that, bankruptcy occurred in 2008. Mr. LaFlame bought this property in 2009, and Madam Chair is correct. He did go for a special permit then. He withdrew it. We don't know why. So there's a factual question here, which, quite frankly, still has not been answered to my satisfaction to say that it's been a pre-existing non-conforming use. What I got told was that there maybe was a little bit of, not repair, but he did a few oil changes. Okay, well, maybe yes, maybe no. And the volume of work, it simply was not enough to say, oh yes, he's been using this. And I also understand, I think the planning board is another, to more address your point, Counselor, usually I get recommendations from the planning board on issues like this, and they're the ones who would indicate, yes, we think it's pre-existing, no, we don't, because they get all the factual information, plans and everything. But in this situation, I'm not sure if that happens. So this body is tasked with the, making the decision. And, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Someone? Okay, so, and I have my opinion out. I know there are a lot of things that you would look at in terms of whether it's spot zoning. I'm not going to discuss that, just the pre-existing non-conforming use. If it's believed by this body, and they have more information than I do, that he has been operating a truck repair shop since he bought the property, or even, since 2009, obviously it's pre-existing non-conforming, the abandonment rule does not apply, and he'd be okay. But I received no information that confirmed that.
Madam Chair.
So because we are dealing with this so far after the initial fact of him applying for the special permit, what I hear you saying is if we find in the best determination that we can make that he must have been doing the repair, because otherwise, why would he have even come in for a special permit? So logic would tell you he was doing it then, which is why he came in for the permit, which to me would save the pre-existing use. So personally, I think he's made the case that he met using the property for the use within the 2 years. 1 year got used up in the bankruptcy, but when he came in for the special permit, he was ostensibly doing what he was seeking the permit for. So to me, that actually supports the fact that he was continuing the use within the 2 years. So if that is to our discretion, then if we have the flexibility within this order to find that the zone change is not needed because we are stipulating that it's a non-conforming use, that we would have to approve that? Attorney Degnan?
Yes, I think in another nutshell, the one thing when we looked at the special permit, there was, and this is what tripped me up a little bit from a factual standpoint, there was no indication of what the use was going to be. He just said non-conforming structure. Well, okay, we don't know what that is, but certainly you've made the argument that if you've asked all the questions and you've done everything that you can do, and I know that Mr. Laflamme came before you on 2 occasions, along with Attorney Wilson, and said that that's the case, then it's your prerogative.
Okay, thank you. Counselor McGivern?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry for making you wait.
No problem. It's always an interesting conversation when we do these zone changes. I want to jump in, but I want to recap a couple things and then just state my position. We can't just drive into this neighborhood and look at what exists today. That's not fair. That's not fair to anybody who lives in the neighborhood, anybody who owns property, whether it's commercial or residential. We have to understand the history of this neighborhood. The newest buildings in the immediate part of where this particular property is are the condos. My understanding is the condos were built on a junkyard. Therefore, King's Garage, or what it was before King's Garage, was next to a commercial use property, probably before zoning was even put into place. If you follow the map down going towards West Springfield, almost everything, all the ways to Dean Vocational School, which is relatively new in the scheme of things, is commercial. We have car dealership after car dealership, trucking companies. We have commercial property that coexisted together in a residential neighborhood. Now, the history of Holyoke tells us our neighborhoods were designed to coexist with commercial, businesses, and residential. They wanted people to be able to walk to work. There's a dingle that goes up to Calvary Cemetery that used to be a dirt road, and the people who lived in Elmwood walked down that dingle every day to walk into this neighborhood to work in the different businesses factories and so forth. So it may look like a house, but the reality is it's not a house, and it's never going to be a house. If we don't take a vote, then we cannot do our real job, and that is to make sense out of what is actually needed in that neighborhood. Now here's where the fun part comes, because I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to pretend to be an attorney, but the definition of a spot zone is when a legislative body passes a zone change and the sole beneficiary is the property owner. We've already proven through the public hearing, we've heard testimony, that's not the case. 3/4 of the neighbors who spoke cited good examples of why they want the zone change, why they want this owner to stay there, why they believe this is the best thing for their neighborhood. So that takes part of the spot zone argument out of it. The second part of it is, if we don't pass the zone change, we're going to end up with a vacant building. Eventually the roof is going to give in. Eventually we're going to have a blighted piece of property. So by passing the zone, it's not for the sole benefit of the owner. It's for the neighborhood on the whole, and in general for everybody who lives or owns business property in that neighborhood. The only thing we can do is what's in front of us, and that's a zone change. The reason the petitioner came to us is because the building department refused to give him a special permit. The building department refused to recognize it as non-conforming use. We don't have that in our purview. We can't wave a wand and say it's non-conforming use. The building department or the law department, or that's their purview, not ours. The only reason we have a zone change before us is because that did not happen. And Mr. Cody, I think, made some good points in his judgment, but right now, our choice is to pass the zone, better the entire neighborhood in the long run, or don't pass the zone and create a vacant, blighted piece of property. Therefore, I'm going to vote in favor of the zone change because I think it's our only choice to do the right thing.
Thank you. Councilor Jourdain.
Yeah. I'd like to piggyback on what Councilor McGivern said, because I think he's spot on here. A couple of additional points. One is, he makes a great point, Joe does, on the history, and to have the history. See, we can't come into this ignoring the history of this parcel and everything that has gone with it. This was and always has been exactly the use that we're here considering today, a business highway use. It was King's Trucking from at least back into the 50s. Now, here's the other thing. I know pre-existing non-conforming use gives us this warm, fuzzy blanket. We as politicians, we like compromises. We like to pass the issue. But in this case, it's not going to be particularly beneficial. And quite frankly, it's a distinction without a difference. So let me explain. King's Trucking had it for all these years. So Mr. LaFlamme comes along after taking this from King's, because we know that zoning only started in the early 70s, right? So the city obviously existed for many, many years, well over 100, before zoning ever started. This use was always allowed. This use is the use that has always been done on this property, okay? Zoning happens. Some point along the way, somebody decides, we're going to blanket the whole area as downtown residential. Nobody's ever consulted about that, okay? Somebody decides, we're just changing your parcel and we're going to call all of South Holyoke downtown residential. Okay, that's nice. Well, King's continues to do their work, and they don't have this place looking anywhere near as nice as Mr. LaFlamme has it. Now, Mr. LaFlamme comes along. He inherits, and this is the thing we need to understand about pre-existing non-conforming use, as long as there's not a break, it goes on to the next person. Okay? I think we all understand that concept. So he inherits it from the prior user. And theoretically, if Mr. Laflamme sold it, and seems like everybody, the planning board, everybody feels wonderful about pre-existing non-conforming use. We're all in agreement that would be the ideal, and we all just get away from the issue and live happily ever after. Okay, but the impact to the neighborhood is exactly the same, because Mr. Laflamme will do exactly what he's doing in BH as he would with his pre-existing non-conforming use. There is a distinction without a difference. And if he were to go and sell the property, he would go and give it to somebody else, and they would inherit the same pre-existing non-conforming use that he has. Therefore, all of the same uses that BH would allow by your vote in approving this are going to be the exact same uses that pre-existing non-conforming use will have here. It's a distinction without a difference. So basically, this is all a semantical wordplay, and moreover, the question now becomes, what is in fact what does justice call for us to do here? This has always been used for this. The overwhelming number of the neighbors want this. I heard one objection, quite frankly. One person who, whatever. One person objected who's new to that neighborhood, by the way, perhaps doesn't have the history, which is fine. But everybody else was in strong support. They laid it on pretty thick, their praise for Mr. Laflamme. And this use that has always been the use for at least 70 years that we know of, perhaps longer, would continue to be the same use. And meanwhile, he has fixed up the building, made it look nice. Now, some people raised other legitimate questions, which this council doesn't need to address here, which is saying, does he have an oil separator, or does he have this, or does he have that, blah, blah, blah. Those are rules and regulations regarding the use, not under our purview. We strictly look at the zoning piece. Naturally, if he's going to operate the business that he's going to, he has to follow all the rules of a similar situated business. Okay? But that's for others to decide. We don't have to worry those questions for ourselves here. So when we look at the fact that, oh, by the way, there's also another industrial zoned parcel literally just a few homes away, right up the street from this, there goes to show this was an industrial use on the exact same Temple Street that kept its industrial. Obviously, they must have been more thorough in making sure it was preserved at the time. Right? House, industrial. House, that's spot zoning too, theoretically. This is going to be the exact same outcome. Why? Because that was an industrial use from time immemorial, and so wasn't this. This is the logical outcome. Now, it would be nice if we could pass the buck, do the pre-existing non-conforming use, but unfortunately, the realities are they won't let him get a business permit, they won't let him get a special permit, they won't let him keep his pre-existing non-conforming use. Perhaps more research needs to be done into this. This is the obvious solution to it. Anybody that would come after him under pre-existing non-conforming would be having the same as if we had granted the BH. So any of the concerns with that would be the same with this. And to me, this just makes the most sense. If we were building this neighborhood from scratch, brand new today, would we allow this? No, but you wouldn't have had King's Trucking there for 70 years, okay? But this is the way the city is. We developed as an older community. Industrial was with this and that. This is why people even created zoning in the 70s in the first place. So you wouldn't have situations like this. Before, you could just put this with that and that with this. That's the whole point. So we're now trying to fit a square peg in a circular hole. So I think the obvious solution here is that we grant the BH zone. Any other result is going to be what? Shut the guy down who has been there, who's doing the exact same thing as everybody else that's ever had the parcel and doing it there, despite the fact nobody has a problem with it? I mean, that would be a crazy result. But, it wouldn't be the first crazy decision this council and others have made. So that's why I'll be voting for BH. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Givner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for clarity, if we decided that this was a pre-existing non-conforming, the owner would not be able to operate his business as he has?
So I think.
Question, yes, because I'm under
So-
the impression that as a BH, anything can come in there after him, and the whole point would be to keep it as it is and keep the neighbors happy,
So, yes, that was the initial thought. The problem with it was that we are not the body that determines if it's a pre-existing use or not. It is other departments within the city that make that determination and therefore denied a license and denied other things. So it was our understanding through the public hearing process that that was not an avenue for us to pursue. Now, I would note a couple of things. We just approved that zone change for the church on the faith that the project that we think will happen will happen. Now, we have no guarantee that that project will happen, and we approved that zone change. I voted for it, so I'm not arguing against it.
there's also a Dunkin' Donuts across the street from it.
Right.
This is not-
But in this case, we're not in the environment of not knowing whether the project will happen as described,
Right.
because it's already there and it's been there for 10 years. The other thing I would just remind folks of is that's a very small lot. So if you're looking at all of the things that could happen in BH, there's no way that the noxious things that you wouldn't want to have happen would even fit there. There's just simply not enough room. It's a tiny lot. So I think, a lot of the concerns or the fears that if something happens to him, what will happen? It's like there's really limited what could happen on this lot. So I would just make those points there. Counselor Maldonado
I think
Velez.
GIVNER is still.
I'm sorry?
I think Counselor GIVNER still. has-
Oh, Counselor Givner, I'm sorry, you have the floor still.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my biggest problem with this neighborhood specifically, if we can't do a pre-existing non-conforming, which I don't understand at all, considering that it's always been used for this, is when I look at the neighborhood, it's surrounded by houses, and you have to go, over to Main Street to start hitting businesses. So, as much as I understand that this neighborhood used to be more commercial, I also understand that it's become residential. So, in my mind, it looks like it's turning into residential, and eventually whoever leaves that specific property, that spot will become like a residential space. So I still don't understand why we can't do the pre-existing non-conforming, since it's always been used for that, and every owner has used it for the same thing, and there seems to be no question as to whether or not that's happened. I don't understand why suddenly there's question as to whether or not it's pre-existing non-conforming.
Well, so.
And he bought it in 2009, right?
Right, so-
After it was sale in 2008, so I don't understand the problem.
Right, so in the public hearing process, that question was delved into, and the reason that the license wasn't provided was because they said it was non-conforming. But the building permit had been given, but apparently it was stated that it wasn't given under that. It was just given to make improvements to the building. And then when the planning board came up with their data, they said something about a permit being given out of the old records for a shed, which clearly the building is not a shed. So I think there have been problems in the records. I think there has been problems with the process. But to speak of the character of the neighborhood and to say that this hasn't been a business in the neighborhood would be an inaccurate characterization, because when you drive through the neighborhood, that business has been there every time you drive through. So we're not making a
That's
change.
exactly what I just said, is
We're
that it's always
maintaining
been-
the status quo of the business.
Yeah.
So it would change nothing, whereas the church is a gamble. I mean, we're going on trust that business is
The
going to be
church is a
developed, and I
gamble
hope it
across
is.
the street from a Dunkin' Donuts and next to a grocery store and other BH, so I mean, I don't think it's the
I
same.
hear you, but I'm just saying, one is a known
This is literally in
quantity.
the middle of a neighborhood.
But it's been there and it is there, and like with
So
the-
why isn't it pre-existing non-conforming?
I'm sorry?
Because
So why
it was,
isn't it pre-
yeah, there was apparently, there's a potential belief that there was a 2-year of a non-use. Not that it was used for anything else, but if there's a
Right.
2-year
Is
non-use.
there anything we can do as a city to accommodate this person and give them this non-conforming? Because it sounds like we as a city failed this owner through permitting, through
So
process.
if I'm understanding it correctly, I think Kathy gave them a shot by saying for them to prove it. And they yet have proven it. And that's why she has not followed through with giving them the non-conforming thing. She can't just go based off of their word. She needs them to prove it.
Well,
For us, we can go based off of their
They bought
word.
it in 2009.
No,
right?
right, but like they need to prove to her that they
were
used it
using
for
it.
those uses for those 2 years.
but
That it
here's
did
the
not take a break during the 2 years. So
even
they need
if
to prove
we
that.
say it was a non-conforming use, that does not compel the building department to say it's a non-conforming use. It does not compel the licensing board.
I understand that.
To say it either. Even if it's our opinion, they can still fail to give the license. They can still fail to blah, blah, blah. So I do believe, and I mean, I know we're revisiting a lot of the public hearing, but at a certain point, when we close the public hearing, I felt like we'd gone down every path that we could through the public hearing process and gotten every answer that we could that's within our purview, and what we're left with is what is before us with this zone change. Councilor Rivera?
So, for me, I guess, just to end a lot of the discussion, and I'm done after this, I'll probably vote yes, just off the strength that I'm not petty, right? I'm not petty. He's been functioning illegally for like the last 10 years. Nobody's called the attention. Nobody's done anything about it. If it was me or if it was a different person in a different circumstance or situation, it might not be getting the same attention or the same rigorous thought process that's happening here. But I'm going to vote yes because I'm not petty, and I believe that the man should get his due diligence if he's invested all this time. Granted, I do not believe in BH zone and spot zoning 110%. So hopefully they could figure something out where it works out for us in the long run if he decides to sell it or something like that, because I do believe someone can turn that into a house. I do not believe it will stay abandoned. The scare tactics and all that fear stuff, that does not work with me. Trust me, I know people that will buy that property in a heartbeat and turn it into a house once we change it to residential, because it has.
It is residential.
No, well then sell it to someone, and I know someone will buy it and put a bunch of cars in there and have all their motorcycles and all their stuff in all that space. So like in a heartbeat. I know a lot of people that are looking for a garage space. So like, that's not the issue. That place will not stay empty. That is a nice neighborhood and it's very quiet. It's an awesome neighborhood, to be honest. I'm glad that he's an awesome neighbor and that he had so many people come into this council, because if not, I would not have voted. I would not decide to vote yes. It hurts me to vote yes right now, but it also hurts me to be able to see this guy walk away empty-handed after as much time he's put in to the community and to his neighbors and all the other stuff. Although, I'm just saying, other people would probably not get the same shake operating 10 years illegally in their space.
Well, that's another
Just saying.
matter of
That is it.
enforcement.
That is another matter of enforcement or whatever, but
Yeah, I hear
I'm
you.
not petty, so I'm going to vote yes for it.
I hear you.
But at the end of the day, we have to figure out the situation, because I believe that zoning came up for a reason. It wasn't just somebody thought about it. It was people with master's degrees in regional planning and that have gone to school and studied this closely and have thought that it made sense for that neighborhood to move in the direction of residential, because they no longer have an empty lot that has a junkyard. It now has a condo. Just like back in the day, supposedly the mall was a trash yard too. Now it's a mall,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Things
yeah.
change and you move on. And as a community, we have to continue to change. At one time, English was the dominant language. Now it's 50-50. Now we have to provide translation. If it's, are we not going to provide translation because things change? We have to continue with the process of change within the community. Yes, we need to know our history, but knowing the history is so that it provides us a path to the future and guidance within that path to the future. So again, I'll vote yes because this man deserves that. Because if it was me, I would hope somebody would help me, even though they probably won't. But at the end of the day, he got my vote now.
Councilor Maldonado Velez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I'm petty, but I still want to vote no, Councilor Rivera. So I'm separating. So one way I'm looking at it is taking Mr. Laflamme out of the equation. So I just want to reiterate, when I voted yes on the BH for the church, it was that again, if Dennis wasn't here tomorrow, I'd be okay with that being a BH zone in that area. And with this one, that's not the case. Spot zone is like, it's, when I think of BH business highway, I think of a zone that is very busy. Cars are passing through all the time. A highway, I know it's not one for one as far as the definition between the business highway and what a highway actually is, but that's what comes to mind as to where the BH zone can be. This is not that area. So I'm still going into, so no out of the committee. If on October 4th, where there is no other way pre-existing, a lot of the discussion we've been having today, the vote may change. But I also want to talk about Mr. Laflamme, not in a bad way, because I think everyone that came in and spoke about Mr. Laflamme, what he does in that neighborhood, the neighbors, great. But the reality is that's not the only property that Mr. Laflamme owns. He owns a property right next to it. So a lot of when we're talking about zoning and saying that it can be it can't be a spot change or a spot zone if the members of the community are asking for it. But reality, the members of the community were thankful not for the business that's going to go in there. They were thankful for Mr. Laflamme, which I'm assuming Mr. Laflamme will still be part of that community given the fact that he still owns the building right next to it, right? So there is that sort of like where I'm coming in with Mr. Laflamme, where what I was hearing here as far as members of the community had nothing to do with that business. It was what he was doing as a good neighbor, which I'm hoping won't change if this BH zone doesn't open. So I'm voting no for it today, just where it stands. And I think on October 4th, when we have the final vote, it may change, but it just does not, taking all the people out of the equation, that zone right there does not feel like it should be a BH zone.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. This is a public hearing. No, we're not in public hearing. Public hearing's closed. So I'm ready to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to be approved as BH.
Is there a second? I will second that motion. So we will now vote with a roll call. Councilor Jourdain?
Yes.
Councilor Bacon, yes. Councilor Maldonado Velez?
No.
Councilor Izzy Rivera?
Yes.
Councilor GIVNER?
No.
Okay, so this recommendation is going to go to the city council, recommending to approve the zone change with a 3-2 vote out of committee tonight. Thank you all for your discussion, your debate, and your perspectives.
What's the next item we'd like to go to?
Well, we're still waiting for the planning board, so I guess we can just keep going.
Did we table number 1 because, have a good night?
Good night.
Did we table 1 because the microphone wasn't working?
No, we
or
tabled one
we needed
because
more
the
info?
person who wants the license is not here.
Oh, okay.
And we didn't hear from her following her non-appearance due to personal issues the last
Okay.
time.
All right, that's
So we're
fine.
giving her another chance.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Would we like to go to, we
So-
need more time on 2 for our planning board friends and 3?
Yes, 2 and 3 are joint hearings.
Okay.
So we could go,
7, 8, or 9.
You want to go to 7?
okay,
Or
let me find my agenda.
are we need to wait on 5?
I
or-
wanted to take all the food truck stuff up together. I mean, we have
Okay.
a joint hearing and then a couple of things that relate to it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we do have information. related to 7 or 8.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to get some info on some of these.
Yep. On item 8, we have an updated thing from legal because we had asked relative to civil service.
Is that in
So
our
do
packets?
you want to take, yep. You
Take
want
a
to take up item
motion to
8?
take up item number 8?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Taking up item 8. So, item 8 is an order that an ordinance be created to allow for a fire chief contract and that this ordinance also establish a salary range for the position, min, mid, max. At the last meeting, the question was raised, given the language that was before us, as to whether this position was civil service or not, because civil
Right.
service would control.
Right.
So now before us tonight, we have updated language from Attorney Dagnan, who is still with us.
Do we
So,
have that in our packets?
yes. Do you want to just run through the legal language for us, Attorney Dagnan? We're on.
Certainly, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Councilor Jourdain had an excellent question when this was brought up last. And so what I had done is, basically is indicating that in accordance with Chapter 41, Section 1080, the Board of Fire Commissioners shall award a contract to the fire chief. And, let me see. The big issue here, I'm just gonna go down, was, as you said, the civil service law. And I found, in our code that in 1917, the City Council of the City of Holyoke passed a special act that indicated that the position of fire chief is subject to the civil service law, and the contract awarded the fire chief shall comply with civil service law with respect to discipline, termination, and reappointment. So, I mean, that was the very big question that was brought up, correctly, I think, by Councilor Jourdain. And that's the change. I mean, that's
Okay.
the change that was made.
Okay. Now, relative to the salary scale, because we were looking at that in keeping with the other non-union salaries, if it is a contract negotiation, does a scale then not apply, like for the fire chief and the police chief?
Yeah, that was my concern as well, and I don't see, unless I missed it, I don't see the police chief, on Exhibit A,
Okay.
the Schedule A that we have all the
Okay,
salaries
so,
on.
okay. I just
Okay,
wanted
so
to
yeah.
just double check that. Okay.
Yeah, sure,
It
you're right.
used to be. It used to be. We used to have an ordinance, the history is before 1996, when we created the police chief ordinance that allowed them to go to a contract. It used to have an ordinance that said that the police chief would be paid twice the base salary of the patrolman. And so that ordinance was deleted when we created the police chief salary item.
Okay, so if we adopt this updated language now.
This is
I
good.
believe-
The only thing is, though, I also need to give credit to Counselor McGivern because he also put in a point here. I believe Joe, I don't know if Joe's still on or not, but we had language relative that the fire chief contract, we wanted to have a clause in here that said the agreement is subject to appropriation by the city council. So we wanted to clarify, that was the other point, Kathy, that we wanted to go over. And I would relinquish the floor to recognize Counselor McGivern relative to the point about still the council retains the authority to appropriate the money and that they can't approve a contract that without the council also approving the funds for it.
I'm not seeing his hand, but Counselor McGivern, would you like to
Thank
weigh
you,
in?
Chair Bacon. I'll just wait. Sorry. Thank you, Councilor Jourdain. Kevin said it perfect. These things, need to be subject to appropriation. I understand that, we are not the appointing authority, and that's fine. In this case, the fire commission, and certainly the mayor is going to play, and most mayors will weigh in on the appointment of a fire chief, appointment of a police chief. But just to give an open checkbook for the salary, I think needs the scrutiny of the city council, and that's why I suggest it would be subject to appropriation.
Okay. So then I would offer that we amend this and put at the end of this legal form that we have in front of us, subject to
Yeah.
appropriation.
Any agreement approved under, or granted under this section is subject to the appropriation of the city council. I would make that as an
By the
amendment.
city council, so that any contracts is subject to appropriation by the city council. That
Right.
would be the amendment.
I would say any contract awarded under this ordinance is subject to appropriation by the city council.
Are you all set with that, Attorney Degnan?
Yes, I've just written that down.
Okay,
So
okay, great, so that's an amendment?
that's an amendment. And I wanted to thank Kathy for doing that research on the special act. Thank you, Kathy. Good homework on that.
All the way back to
Thank you, Councilor.
1917?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So we have an amendment to this legal form on the floor. Is there a second? So we have an amendment that is seconded to add the clause that any contract awarded under this ordinance is subject to appropriation by the city council, or of the city council, whichever
By
legal
the- yep,
is proper.
Yep.
By?
By the city.
Okay.
council,
All in favor? So Counsel Rivera?
Yes.
Counsel Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jordan?
yeah. Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Okay, so that's 5-0 on the amendment, and
Ma-
so now,
Make a motion to be approved as amended.
Second.
so all in favor, Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Okay, you have approved this as amended, 5-0, and that will go to city council on the 4th. Thank you very much. Okay,
Take up item number 9.
all right, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Counselor Givner, yes? Counselor
Yes.
Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes?
Yeah.
Counselor Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Okay, so we have item 9 before us. Ordered that an ordinance be created that requires a department head to report with an incident report explaining the cause of any loss in their department over $250 in value to the city council and mayor within 30 days. Now, we tabled that on 8/23.
I believe we were
I
going to
think
get
we
some.
tabled it for legal.
That's right, yeah. Draft language. I don't know if the law
Attorney-
department got to it or not.
I don't have anything before us. I don't know, Attorney Degnan, if you or anyone has had time to look at this one yet?
Thank you very much. Jeffrey was kind enough to remind me of this yesterday afternoon, and he sent me the order too. So, in answer to your question, I have not. I just have a question before I, start working on it, and that is should this? You said it should apply to all department heads. So, are we talking about police and fire and schools and everybody, or is it
Yes.
everyone?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so I think at this point we'll just take up a motion to table and without a date certain, because we don't.
Yeah, hopefully you think, Kathy, for our next ordinance meeting, you should have something for us?
For next ordinance, yes.
Okay, all right, so I'll make a motion to table it to the next ordinance meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Counselor Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Maldonado Velez?
yes.
Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Make a motion to take up item 10?
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
In favor, Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Okay, so we're taking up item 10. Ordered that Mayor Garcia be given the authority to hire a DPW director above mid-range up to no more than max without needing further approval from the city council due to special circumstances relative to that position. This is a cleanup from the last one that we passed, which that was the intention of. But the way that it was written, he had to come back to us yet again when he came up with the salary. So this is just clarifying that he would not need to return to the council.
Can I, a couple things?
Counselor Jourdain.
I have no problem with this, but I think the council just needs to be limited in scope on it. If we give this, we're saying it's for the hiring of the next DPW, not all DPW
Oh, okay.
directors for now and forever. We are, and I know the mayor is working on a draft ordinance that I believe is going to be filed for next week that speaks to this issue, but giving him broader authority over sort of any department head, because he's having some difficulty apparently filling some. And I believe the recommendation there that I had made to him was, yes, let's give you that you could hire people between the middle range and the max, but that we do a renewable authority every year, because if he wants to do it for everybody, that the council would review it to see how the policy's working, so we don't just pass an ordinance and it's gone forever. And then number two is that there be a requirement that the mayor, after he does hire somebody, notify the council within 30 days after the hire to say, this is why I gave this person this salary. They had a lot of experience. There wasn't able to fill the position for whatever period of time. That's why I gave this extra money. Now, he's clearly already made the case to us for this particular example, but if we're going to have a more broad policy, which I think is where he's going with it, then we would want to have some of these checks and balances in it, so that the council doesn't just say anybody forever can just be hired over the mid-range, because then that basically defeats the whole point. That means the mayor can pick any salary from min to max and just give it to anybody for any reason forever.
So before us, we are only talking about the DPW superintendent. And if there is an amendment offered to say to hire the next DPW,
Or
is that what you're saying?
Either that, or we got to put a time limit on it of saying, we give this authority for 6 months, and then if he wants to renew it, come back for six
Well,
more months.
I would tend to say the next DPW.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
I mean, that's the idea.
Not all
I think.
DPW.
But relative to the draft, we don't have anything before us. But I would not be warm to extending it beyond the mid-range without making a statement as to what would be special circumstances.
That's
Up
right.
front, not after the fact.
Real quick though,
But that's not even before us. Councilor Rivera.
no, I'm hearing what Kevin is saying, or Councilor Jourdain is saying, and I agree. I'm just curious to know, like, what is the like how does it alter the ordinance now if we do vote for this? Like,
If we vote.
if we vote for this, does it actually?
Right now, there's an ordinance that says you can't go over the mid-range.
But does this forever, like in stone, change that ordinance?
If we vote this through,
That's what I'm questioning,
It's a
because
good
right now it seems like it's just a request for us to vote for this now. But if it's like forever, then yeah, right.
if we clarify that the purpose of this vote is so that the mayor can hire the next DPW superintendent above the mid-range, but not more than the max, it
Right.
is only for that
Okay,
one time.
all right.
And I just wanted to spell out, it's a one-time
Yeah,
grant,
yeah.
which is exactly, we're not creating a blanket policy.
Right, but the subsequent order that is being requested of us.
But this would
is
not overrule
broader.
if we didn't come up with that,
Correct.
right?
This is just.
This would not be able
one
to
time,
overrule
one
ordinance
job.
though,
Correct. Because we're going to make it we're basically effectively,
because we're not changing the ordinance.
well, yes, we are in a
Yes.
way, because they
then
want,
that's
this
different.
would be an ordinance change.
Okay, then that's different.
That's temporary. That's why I think we should put an
So then that
expiration
makes
date
sense.
on it,
Then that makes sense.
because
Well,
most
To
ordinances.
make it temporary at least.
Yeah,
To end with the appointment of the DPW superintendent.
yeah, there you go.
That works for me.
Yeah.
No, Mike, but I'm just wrapping my head around like the procedural stuff as far as like. So what we're gonna do is, if we want this to happen, we are gonna change the ordinance, and once this is hired, when this position is filled, the ordinance will just automatically fall back to what
what
it
it
is.
is.
And that just,
We're
this is just the first time I've seen of something like this happening with the ordinance language, so that's why I'm
No,
just
and
kind of
and it's not typical, but when we established the salary range, we established the mid as the max because there was concern on some of the counselors that certain people that, may have been liked or whatever were getting a lot of money and other people not so much. So we felt like the mid-range would be reasonable, and that if people had been working for the city for 20 years, why should somebody get hired way above them too? But then there's the argument sometimes of,
no, for
comparable
sure.
experience that's more than the people who are already there, yada, yada,
No, no,
yada.
I
And so that's this argument.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
totally on board for all that. It's just, I guess my question is more of like what, just trying to hear what Councilor Jordan is saying, Councilor Rivera, as far as like what we're passing through. Like, I know we don't
What
have
we're really
actual-
doing.
Yeah, what we're actually doing, because I know we don't have
Right.
legal
Just-
language around it yet or anything. So like, I've never heard of like, we're gonna do an ordinance change for like, for the next 6 months, or temporary,
Yeah.
cognizant on like, if this happens, then the ordinance falls back. And it's just a new sort
Well-
of method.
It's a
for
sunset
me.
clause.
Right, and-
You're effectively putting in a sunset
Right, and-
clause in an ordinance, yeah.
So the reason that we wanted to consider it, and that we did pass it, except that it still required the mayor to come back, which wasn't our intent. So we've already amended the ordinance to allow him in this position to exceed mid. But it was so there would be checks and balances on the expenses in the city, why the mid was established. So what Councilor Jourdain was explaining is they want to broaden that to everything, which I would need, just my perspective on it is, we have to know what those special circumstances would be that would kick that into happening, from my perspective, should we get it and take it up.
Oh.
So,
So we're asking for this to be drawn in a legal form, is that it?
well, we already have a legal form and.
We do?
So we have the legal form that was at city council, which then needs to be amended to eliminate the requirement for the mayor to come back to us. Because the legal form allowed him to exceed the mid-range.
Okay.
For the position, but it required him to still come back to the council.
I see.
So the cleanup is to say he does not have to come back to the council. And the further cleanup, to your point, is to hire the next DPW director. And it will expire when the position is filled.
Okay.
That's your amendment, as I understood it?
That is my amendment. I mean, me, Kevin, I would be a little more precise. I would even put a date that even says 6 months from now.
Well, we don't-
or a year from now, to even be more precise, but that's fine. If
Will expire when the position is filled. The
Yes.
special circumstances will expire when the position is filled. So that's your
I'll
amendment?
defer to legal if that's if that's
Mm-hmm.
precise enough, you know.
Yes, I'm glad that you're discussing this because it was something that I was playing with because we normally don't do temporary ordinances. And I understand why it's being thought like that because we're only doing it for a period of time. But I think it's okay to say the special it's going to be the next DPW superintendent or director, I'm sorry, and the special circumstances will end when the next superintendent is hired.
Got
Perfect.
it. Okay, great.
Perfect. So,
That's
all
my-
in favor of that amendment?
Aye.
Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Velez?
Yes.
Rivera?
Yes.
Givner?
Yes.
Thank you. So 5-0 on the amendment, and then I would hope that we could ask legal to put this in legal form and have it available 48 hours before the city council meeting, so we can move it at the meeting. Is the committee warm?
I'm warm to that if she can pull it off, yeah.
Attorney Dagnan, does that work for you?
Yes, we're talking about getting it
For
to
the
city clerk
4th.
by Thursday.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
will do that.
Okay, great. So I'll entertain a motion to approve as amended.
Approve as amended, second.
Second.
Yep.
All in favor? Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Counselor Givner?
Yes.
Thank you. So that passes 5-0 as amended, and that will go to the city council. So we welcome the planning board members who are back with us now. And so I would entertain a motion to take up item 2 to reopen the public
So moved.
hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Counselor GIVNER?
Yes.
So our public hearing is open.
Okay, and just to make sure there are no errors here, which is your item 2?
Oh, okay. And I should read it into the record also. So our public hearing is open for item 2, which is a joint hearing with the planning board, continued from 5/24/8/23. Ordered that the city council review and amend section 5.4 of the zoning ordinance to allow for accessory dwelling units in the DR zone, in addition to amending section 2 definitions and any other sections that may apply to allow this use in the DR zone. Accessory dwelling unit is a smaller, independent residential unit located on the same lot as a standalone, i.e. detached, single-family home.
And I would entertain a motion from the planning board to reopen our public hearing on the same item.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, Kate,
Yes.
Rosanna,
Yes, ma'am.
and Nimi, yes. So we're open. And
Okay, so we
Can I-
tabled
can I-
last time because we were waiting for information from planning. So you folks can
Yeah.
have the floor if
I
you'd
can,
like
I
it.
can speak to that. I just, I don't see that Jeff or Jack are here, and I'm happy to present, but it might be helpful to have them here. Oh, I see Jeff.
yeah,
There you go. He had to leave. But 3 of us is a quorum, so I think we can proceed. I wasn't here at the last meeting.
We're here.
Great.
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 Aaron
I
has his hand raised.
I'm happy
If
to,
I could,
Yeah.
just a couple comments before Kate gets started,
sure.
when you're ready.
Well, I think we're ready. Kate, are we ready?
That's fine with me.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for addressing this again, and just to the council, since I was earlier, this issue came up before, about ADUs and, even talk about, tiny houses and stuff like that, so the council's been sort of talking about this, so this is a good way to step into that world, because we want to focus on the DR zone, and there's been some interest from developers and others about what our policy is around this, so I do think that, given the times and given, what other cities are doing around this, I think it'd be great to get this on the book. So I want to just thank the planning board for the work they do, and pass it back to the chair, Madam Mimi Panich. Thank you for all you do, and I look forward to the presentation.
Okay, well, take it away, Kate, who has done the lion's share of the work on this with Jeff.
Sure, thank you. I can basically just walk people through, everybody has the proposal in front of them, the proposed language, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So basically, I looked at the information, sort of state level information about how this is being proposed, and Jeff was able to pull some, how it's been written up in some other localities that have ADUs, and we just put together something that we thought might work. Obviously, it's all open to discussion, but we tried to hit on the relevant points. I imagine that, I know this came up last time when I wasn't here. I imagine that some of that was about why the DR zone seemed like the best
We didn't
zone.
get into
Nothing
any
at
of
all? Okay. Well, DR is already the area of town where we are trying to increase density, and we're trying to, we have much more flexibility about the regulations in that zone. And it seemed, because we're trying to encourage housing density and creative use of parcels, it seemed like the right place to start here. And I think that's also where the interest has been in terms of putting in ADUs. But we're making the proposal for DR, but that's not to say that in the future, it might not be something we would expand to other zones, but DR seems like a great place to start because the zoning is relatively amenable to it and there's been interest there. So the proposal, as it stands, defines the accessory dwelling unit as a smaller self-contained living unit attached to a single-family dwelling or in a detached accessory structure. So it could be added on to existing building or it could be separate, but it would be substantially separate even if it were attached. It would be located on the same lot. It must include sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities, so it wouldn't simply be a separate bedroom in the backyard. It would be a whole living unit unto itself. If attached, it must have a separate unit, so it wouldn't be creating an apartment within a building, it would be creating a separate unit. And I think that that difference is because we already have other ordinances that deal with those other cases. So this would be to have a separate entrance, and it wouldn't be sold separately from the primary dwelling, nor would the lot be divided. So it really is to increase what's happening on a single lot, not to split off into more lots.
So can I just interject? It sounds to me like an in-law apartment type of thing, which the
has
city,
similarities.
interestingly enough, has historically prohibited, and people have wanted to do it.
This proposed language, we were asked to create this proposed language because some members of the council proposed it, and we think it's a good idea, but we're responding to that proposal.
Yeah.
Yes, it hasn't been allowed before, which is why we have to create the language to allow it.
Right, but I'm just simply, so if I'm using the terminology in-law apartment, it would translate to this new language that we're talking about similarly.
It's conceptually has some
Right?
similarities, but it is also different. It could be separate.
It could be separate on the lot.
Yeah.
Whereas an in-law apartment would always be attached. But
In
the
your thinking.
concept is.
It's a related concept.
Okay.
So that what I just read, we would need to add a definition of what an accessory dwelling unit was. So that would go in the definitions part of our ordinance, right? So then there would need to we need to figure out some place in the ordinance that it can go, that we're allowing it. And I think there are options about where it would go in ordinance to allow it, but what we thought made most sense, and again, we could talk this through and there might be other options, but it seemed to make most sense to add it into 5.4 because we have a section 5.4 which allows for multiple principal structures. Now, it was a little bit of we had to talk through a number of ways about how to do that. Right now, multiple principal structures, 5.4.1 allows for, except in the residential districts, more than one principal non-residential structure may be erected on a lot. And then there are a number of things that could happen with that. So rather than trying to fit ADUs into this, which is already talking about non-residential districts and non-residential structures, we thought it made more sense to make that 5.4.1A and to add 5.4.1B, which would be a different category of multiple principal structures. It's just a matter of figuring out where to put it in ordinance, and that was where it seemed to make most sense.
We would generally defer to legal on that.
Well, that's
For
why
the
it's also
placement,
been sent
yeah.
to legal. I don't think we've
Yeah.
heard back from them, but
Yeah.
that's what we thought would happen.
That's just historically what we.
So then 5.4.1B would add accessory dwelling units in the downtown residential district. And we thought that putting it there in that way might mean that if in future it was decided that we could have ADUs in other zones, it would be a matter of changing that here, rather than if we put ADUs, say, into 8.8, which talks about downtown residential, then it is many more changes to ordinance to allow ADUs in other districts if you're having to pull it out of section 8.8 about downtown residential, right? So it seemed like it made more sense to just create this section about ADUs, and it would be a simpler, if you wanted to expand it later, once we see how it's working, it would be easier to just change some of the wording of 5.4.1b. Be that as it may. So it would allow in DR more than one principal residential structure on a lot pursuant to a special permit. We thought by the planning board, but that's negotiable, in accordance with all the regulations in section 9.3 and the following conditions. That the secondary structure is an accessory dwelling unit as defined in section 2, so referring back to the definition that I read before. That the owner of the property on which the ADU is to be created shall occupy one of the dwelling units.
Continuously?
We could put that into the language. So the idea is, and we're not 100% sure if that is legally enforceable or not, but we thought that it would be nice to create that as the expectation for the special permit, because what would be less preferable would be to see people coming in and just wanting to create all kinds of extra development. The intention of an ADU more is to allow the property owner to create another unit on their property for a family member or someone they would rent to, so that it becomes part of helping homeowners, helping renters or helping people find housing, but also helping homeowners in the area maintain their property by helping them either house relatives or friends or bring in extra income, right? That it would be preferable to have the homeowner live in one of the units. And so it might be that they're living in the primary unit, or perhaps then as they age, they might swap with their children and they might live in the accessory unit.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So, just thinking about it. So if I am, how do you call it? Someone that owns a home but doesn't live in the community, out of town owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
We would be preventing them from building another piece of rental property on that lot. And I don't mean to say it that way, but that's the idea, so that if I'm the homeowner, I can actually provide generate another income if I take this risk in building the tiny home.
That was our hope in phrasing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that I and Jeff, we were not 100% sure about the enforceability of that,
right.
but we did want to put that out as the
expectation.
intention.
Then I guess for me, then it leads to Airbnb statuses and stuff like that. Would there be a way? I mean, obviously, there's no way to enforce that. But then, if you're in a very condensed area, and then all of a sudden, all of them start becoming Airbnbs, is there a way? I'm not saying that I would want to prevent it, but if it impacts the neighborhood negatively and our economy negatively somehow, some way, then how would we be able to?
Yeah, I think it's important that we're leaving in the intention that the homeowner lives in one of the units. Now, I don't know what could be done in ordinance to regulate whether they rent out the second unit on a more temporary basis that might be something to think about. We don't have to approve this today. This is a proposal. I don't know whether there's a legal way to regulate that, but that's something to consider.
So I have a question.
You know that some communities throughout the country have started controlling for short-term rentals. And I don't know how common it is, and I don't know whether it works under Massachusetts law, but I would think that if we started to see a problem, or we were worried about a problem, one of the things we might explore is just you can rent this dwelling out, but you can't rent it out for periods shorter than X weeks or X months.
And my assumption would be that would be something that probably should be taken up separately, because it would apply to other things, not just ADUs, although you're right to bring it up. It is something to think about, but it's not limited to ADUs.
Yeah.
Let me just read the other two and then take any questions. So then the ADU should be cited in such a way as to provide adequate access for emergency personnel. That is, just having that in there would allow us, when it came for the special permit, to ask those questions. And we don't think it's possible nor reasonable to suggest that they would have to put in a driveway that accessed it, because that's really not going to, well, that's something that can be discussed, but I think that would really limit it. There are going to be a lot of places where people might want to put in an ADU that wouldn't be possible to put a driveway to, and there are a lot of ways that, say, the fire department can get to a unit that is not through a driveway. So we just want to make sure that there's access, but not necessarily unduly limit it in the statute. And then approval of an ADU in the DR zone shall conform to the procedures and requirements of Section 8.8 Downtown Residential District. Because there's all kinds of things in 8.8 referring you back to regulations.
Right. So the question that came to me immediately when I was reading this before the meeting was, I feel comfortable with the concept of a self-contained unit attached to the primary residence. Once you get into, and these lots downtown are usually quite small, once you get into the idea of building a separate independent structure, I start having trouble envisioning buffer zones, impact on neighbors, and things like that. Like if it's connected to the main house, it seems like I can envision how that might work. But once you start putting something somewhere else, and again, my perception, which may be wrong, is that most of the lots are quite small already. How could you do that without impinging on the neighbors? Is, I guess, a question that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I think it's not going to work everywhere. The thing about downtown residential is that all the requirements, I want to ask Jeff to speak to this a little bit too. The requirements in downtown residential are not, as in most other zones, there's a very strict requirement set about what the setbacks are, but in downtown residential, it's what's the average on the street. So there's much more of a, like, if this is an exceptionally dense block, the setbacks might be relatively small because it's already that's already the nature of that block.
So like, what would an example be?
Jeff, can you think of a good example of this? Because I haven't gone out to like map out what this is, but
yeah. I'm just trying to picture it.
I mean, just imagine any block in downtown that has a residential structure currently on it. It's basically just adding another unit to that, and just bearing in mind that DR in particular is, to the point of in-law apartment earlier. Multifamily residential is already allowed in the DR zone. This is just the idea of adding a second livable unit unto itself, or a second structure. But with the DR, it would just be taking the averages of all of these setbacks and then finding that sweet spot of where it could be added. But I said, as far as anything specific, it would just be, think of any residential block that has a residential home that someone wants to add that additional unit to.
Well, I can clearly imagine and picture adding a unit to the house. I can, with much greater difficulty, picture building a separate structure in the yard of the homes I've been to have very small yards.
Yeah.
So I'm just having trouble picturing how that would practically
just
be.
real quick, when you build within the yard itself, anything you build has to be a certain feet away from your neighbor's structure. The closest spot, I think it's like 6 to 8 feet anyways.
Yeah.
So there are already some markers that kind of protect your neighbors. Is it enough? Probably not, right? Yeah. Maybe we can, in the future, when the conversation goes on the road, is like try to map out what the space is to be away from someone. Yeah. But I hear what they're saying with regards to like it being a DR zone and it already being condensed. So for example, if you owned a small building and you wanted to add another piece of that building to the top, you can continue to add another building to the top until the 11th floor, technically, because you're still within.
You hit the zone.
Right.
I guess what I was wondering, so some of these ADUs can be quite small. Like, it's not for nothing that people talk about tiny houses. These wouldn't all need to be tiny houses. But Jeff, do we know where One Holyoke was hoping to put the small unit that they have?
I believe that was Walnut Street.
Walnut.
Can
Yep.
could we use that as an example? Could we pull that up
It's next to Manny's Market.
on the,
Wait, I don't have the ability to share a
Yeah.
screen, so. if
Oh,
someone else
bummer.
can-
It's an empty lot next to
Yeah.
Manny's Market that once had a house, and now it's just empty. So I think if I may, the plan is to build one house and then add that tiny house to the other part of the structure, so that it is still a multifamily. No, not attached. But it's the idea is one, Holyoke has the history of building multifamily homes and having a homeowner be able to help mitigate whatever issues they may have in the future to help offset the cost to own the home with having the multifamily piece. So the tiny home kind of adds to that solution, because that parcel might not be big enough. I don't know what the situation is, why they don't just build a multifamily home on there, but right. That I don't know what the situation is there, but I think that with the multifamily home, it allows for more
So
flexibility.
I would just like to understand, you know,
Yeah.
like what this gives that.
well, what this does is
people
that,
can't
because,
get.
so in this situation, yes, since it's an empty lot, they could build a duplex there, right? But if people already have a house, they're not really going to build a duplex. It might
Right.
very well, in terms of siting, make more sense to just put a tiny home in the backyard. And if they have the space for it, they can do it. Not everybody's going to have the space for it, but some people will.
So as this is envisioned, if there was a special permit, there would be notice to the abutters and they would have an opportunity relative to this
I mean, it's going to go through all the
process?
regular special permit.
Sorry, Jeff, you had-
So one more thing to add is that, as it says here in the draft, there's still the provisions that are set forth under the 8.8, which is the downtown residential. So under 8.8.4, there's a special permit of the planning board when it comes to varying the known dimensional regulations. So there's a special permit there that the applicant can go for. Or in the case of 8.8.5, there's an additional special permit there that the city council may grant a special permit to reduce otherwise applicable requirements. And that was, I'm going to say recently done, but at this point, the days blend. It could have been in the past year where the city council granted a special permit to a developer on Beach Street to infill a very small lot with a property that was feet away from an existing 4-story building. So, I mean, it's not unheard of that the city council has already kind of approved similar small homes on a lot, but now this is just adding that second unit to an existing home. So, I mean, there is the, I shouldn't say flexibility, but there is the possibility that whether it be through 884 or 885, there's that second level of review that either the planning board or city council can have when it comes to siting units.
Thanks. Counselor Jourdain, and
Yeah.
then I'll recognize Counselor Murphy-Ramboletti.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for bringing the concept before us to consider. It's an interesting concept. Obviously, I have to do a lot of homework and ask a lot of good questions. I'm going to start here momentarily on those to kind of understand the ramifications or impact of what we're considering. So, for example, is it contemplated that there would be a square footage requirement for the building itself, for the ADU? I don't see that mentioned in the draft.
The state has one.
Do we have,
We didn't put one in.
so it could be of any size?
Well, because we didn't put one in, assuming that to a large extent, lots are going to determine what's possible. But it doesn't mean that couldn't be in here.
Okay.
And we're bringing you this proposed language, but the idea to do this comes from multiple, city councilors proposed that we have,
Sure.
The order came from city council. We've heard from some people who want them. We're interested in it.
Yeah.
But so, we're responding to the desire to see this proposal.
Yeah, you're just getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
don't, like,
Yeah.
it's not my baby that I feel like I need to protect. I
Correct.
think it's a good idea, and here's some proposed language for you to help us figure out if it works.
Okay. So for whoever is being our note taker here as we consider, I think we need to consider that question, how big of a structure? One of
I
the,
believe the state has a minimum requirement.
okay, then I would count on our planning team to continue to work on interconnecting all these different regulations.
I mean, I guess I would say that I'm not sure it needs to have a minimum or a maximum. I, as the person who drafted it, but is not in, doesn't need to be in charge of revising it, I'm not sure that it needs it, but I'd be happy to hear from people if they thought it did, or if they.
We would just have
Go with
to see how
something.
it complies with state law if it's a separate living space.
Yeah, because now we're talking non-attached.
State minimums, yeah.
For example, is the secondary home bigger than the original home? I don't, that would be kind of interesting concept. We just need to consider that. In terms of the lot itself, generally, we assume that there's high density in these areas. I think that's why we're picking DR. But on the other hand, is it our intention that people could build this with no yard remaining? That they could go to the four corners of their lot?
You're gonna, well, in DR, you have to follow whatever is the average of the street. And you're not gonna have a block where the average is nothing.
Okay. So we're going to spell it out so that there's a minimum amount of yard left?
Well, it's already, well, that's an open question. The setback, how we calculate the setbacks are already spelled out in ordinance.
And then the question is, if the setback were per se 6 to 8 feet, I don't think we would want to leave for a backyard. There's only a 6-foot strip for the backyard where people, say, for example, you have a row of Philadelphia cottages or something, and this person wants to put this in their backyard, and now there's only enough room to walk. They're 6 feet from the alleyway, for example, but now there's only just a little strip to walk to the main building, and now there is no longer a yard, and this house says, no, I don't want to do that. Then the next one says, yeah, I like that idea. I'm going to do that because I'm going to rent out my back and people will come in through the alleyway in the back. How aesthetic is that to now have no yards left? I think we need to consider what we're going to have for remaining residual yard space. We don't allow people to build a home or homes, plural, that would consume their whole lot. Typically, we need to consider what regulations on it. Again, I'm not looking for answers. I'm simply raising questions.
Just to respond, the maximum lot coverage is also one of the things that's an average of the street.
Okay.
So there would already be a number for how much of the lot you could cover, but it's not a static number that I could tell you right now. It would be something that would have to be determined. The regulations for DR already say that the maximum lot coverage is determined by averaging what's on the block.
The problem with the average language is that as people begin to do this, averages are of what's there today.
Yeah.
But of course, as more people put these in, the average continues to go down, right? Because there's less residual yard left.
My guess would be if there's a concern about that would entail, and Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would entail changing the regulation for DR under 8.8 independent of any language about ADUs.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So we mentioned setbacks. I'd like to learn more about what will be the setbacks overall to the building, to the neighbors, back, front, all height. All these rules are there going to be rules on this? I think that all needs to be spelled out when we get to the next version as we continue to put more meat on this. I wanted to ask about utilities. So obviously, if you have an attached building, you're going to have the utilities running from the main home, right? Electricity, conceivably water, sewer, all of that. If we now allow a person to build an entirely different home of unlimited size, as we heard, then you could, how are we going to handle, like, for example, septic, sewage? How would that be
Well,
done?
it specifies that it has to include sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities. So somebody's going to have to, in presenting their request for a special permit, show that they are providing sanitary facilities.
So you can, I guess you'd have to trench your yard to connect the sewer into the main house's sewer?
I think there are probably a variety of ways to do that.
Because we're not going to allow septic when the home's on city sewer, right?
It's a good question. I would doubt it, but I don't think it's.
Because I think you have to have certain requirements for that.
Yeah, you'd have to follow whatever the city regulations are. Jeff, do you have any input on that?
I do not. I mean, presumably it's gonna be separate services, because I'm obviously the electric, I mean, I would think it have its own service, so it wouldn't be fed off the primary structure. It's all gonna be independent, presumably.
If I may, right, and this is a great question. Councilor Jordan, that's a great question. I think for me, right, is like the person or the people or whomever is gonna undertake this task, they would have to do their due diligence and actually raise a significant amount of money to be able to do this the right way, right? They would have to come to us, and if we don't like the plan they give us, right, you're gonna trench it yourself and do what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Who are you gonna contract with?
Right.
Right, and that's something that they would be up to our purview when they came up in front of us. But again, not to belabor the point with Holyoke, but they have a home that is actually net zero with regards to utilities, and if that's something that people are exploring, then that would be a great thing, and it would solve 90% of the issues. Maybe not the septic, and maybe they do. I just don't know enough about that tiny home that they have. But I do know energy-wise, they're saving massive amount of money on energy and costs on all utilities with regards to that house specifically that was built through UMass project or whatnot. So like, if those are things that people are presenting to us, it makes it easier for us across the board. But like, it's a great question if someone comes and says, I'm gonna dig a trench myself and do the septic, and like, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I just wanted to clarify with regards to like, there will be a variety of different projects and different people that come up, and when they come up, I'm expecting that this person is gonna either take out another mortgage on their home or have an inheritance that's gonna help them pay for this, because this is not gonna be, oh, I just build a little home in the back and you can live there. That's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be hopefully a vetted process where it's a little safer than that.
In addition to getting a special permit to build the ADU, they're gonna have to get a building permit. So they're gonna, like, the building inspectors are gonna have to approve their systems.
But I think that begs the question, because they're going to get a building permit based on rules that we create. So the question is, as the originators of all of this, we need to make sure that the rules are correct so that the people that issue permits are granting them consistent with us. We can't say, well, they'll figure it out. We're the makers of all the rules here, the collective group of us. So we have to make sure that the rules of all this, and then the people that we hire here that do a very good job going around giving out permits, they're just gonna do what we ask them to do, right? We have to make sure the game is set up correctly. So I would be concerned about people creating septic systems in the DR zone. I don't know if people would really want that, or if we're even designed to do that. So I don't know if we have to get into, and if you're going to have your own separate utilities, how does this work with the water department and the sewer department? Like, how do they allow, because I don't even, there's rules on all of that goes into creating new utilities, electricity, things of this nature, heating. If, say, the main house has natural gas, is it they're going to add another pipe out for natural gas out to the other?
I think all of this will be revisited multiple times before we figure it out.
Right.
Because I think you're asking very valid questions, and this is something new. So I think as this is something new, all of us together, we're gonna figure this out. And all parties in the city will have to be involved.
Agreed.
So like everything else, I think we will have to go to different departments. And you're correct. Us being here is where we're gonna have the conversation to create the rules, to kind of make sure the other departments follow suit as well. So I think these conversations are good because this is gonna be ongoing for a while till we get it right.
I agree. Yeah, so that's it's exactly in that spirit that I wanted to raise these, so people kind of percolate these thoughts. It doesn't say that there would be one unit. Can you have 3 units if you could fit them? Are we contemplating a limit on the number of units? Or that's a TBD? Okay, so
I think we were,
At this
The
point,
assumption was
draft
it would be
made
a
up
s-
for one unit. There
Yeah.
was one additional unit.
one.
but
Okay.
I suppose that
We should maybe
that
write that
could
in here.
be, there might be language in here that made that clearer. I don't think it states specifically that there's only one. Now,
It kind of states it through the draft where it says a secondary structure, basically. It kind of implies that, but it probably could be clearer.
Could be
to say
clearer.
A secondary structure having
Yeah.
one additional unit.
Right. I think we should say one, if that's what we
Yep.
mean. Yep. Now, the other thing for us to consider if we're thinking about other zones, I mean, to me, RA comes to mind because RA is typically huge parcels where people could add another home on that is sort of the other end of the pendulum from high density to very low density where it wouldn't be much impact. You know, maybe we consider as we're thinking about this, that as well.
I think that we were starting this proposal with DR simply because it seemed easier to start there in the place that had been requested. But if the feeling of the council was to start with more than one zone, I don't think we're going to be objecting to that.
Right. I mean, we don't even know if we want to do any zones yet, right? We have to figure this all out together, but I was just saying, well, you know, in an RA zone, it almost seems like that would be a natural fit in one extent for another building because you've got maybe a 5-10 acre lot and, you know.
I think
We've had requests for attached.
I think what makes it easier in DR is that and Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong, because DR already allows more than one structure on a unit, there is sort of already a sense that DR could accommodate this in a way that a lot of the other residential zones specify very clearly how many units you can have on a zone, and so might take a little more work to figure out, you know, in R1, it's gonna take more work to figure out how to get a second unit, if that's even desirable on an R1, whereas DR already sort of accommodates this idea.
No.
The other thing to add to that is that we were looking for where is adding density appropriate to the desired character of the neighborhood. And, you know, DR is supposed to be the kind of urban adjacent zone where you want density, you want a lot of people living in a small space. People who are attracted to that will preferentially go to DR. And of course, it's the norm for major cities from Paris to New York to San Francisco, whereas RA is predominantly agricultural. And if you start adding density there, you are altering the character of the zone. And that may be something we want to do, but that was part of the rationale for not starting with the single resident districts.
My last is just an info request, which is maybe Jeff or somebody could email me a PDF of the zones. You know, do we have something like down even to the parcel level?
Yeah, it's very simple. If you go on to, what is it, Holyoke.io, it's all online. You can see it.
If you Google Holyoke Map Geo, the Map Geo site will come up and you can search.
Okay, Map Geo would have it, all right.
And what you can do, Kevin.
I'm still with Kevin.
Would
I
it
want an email.
have, though, I guess that's good if I'm looking up each individual parcel. I'm very familiar with Map Geo, I use it frequently. But what I'm looking for is, I would like to see a map, maybe it's not too far afield from the one behind Jeff's head there, is that, gives me a sense of like this whole area. I don't
Yeah,
want to have to look up every single
Yeah.
individual
No,
one.
no, what you can do, so go to Map Geo, and when you go into, there's a layers, is it called layers, Jeff? Anyway, there's a function that you can pull.
Themes.
It's
Themes.
themes. So
Themes?
if you scroll down through themes, one of them is zoning, and if you click on the zoning button, you can see at sort of any density, you know, as close as you go or as far out as you go, you can see all the zoning. And you can also adjust the transparency of it, so you can make it,
We need training.
yeah, you can see the color you can see like only the color of the zone, or you can make it more transparent so you can have a much better sense of what the buildings are. So yeah, if you zoom back out to see the whole city, you can see where all the zones are.
Cool.
And what you'll notice, and I think that we've sort of gotten into this as we've been talking about rezoning specific parcels, you'll see that there are some places where there are very large blocks of a zone, and then there's some places where it's a patchwork, and it can get very granular and confusing.
Okay. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Counselor Tessa Murphy-Ramboletti, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. I really just wanted to first thank everyone for the planning board for their work on this. I think this is really important conversation to have. I've been trying to do my own research, and you know, I'm just curious if, I don't know if it's Kate maybe who could answer this, or anyone from planning board. How does this compare to other cities in Massachusetts that currently have, you know, practices in place for ADUs? I know that we're not the first to discuss this, so I'm just curious if there's any municipalities you might suggest to us that we take a look at that might be similar, or if you referenced any, you know, while you were kind of putting this together.
Yeah, of course, now on the spot, I'm not going to remember what they all were.
Sorry.
Jeff can probably help me. But we looked primarily at what the state regs were, and one other city, I'm thinking maybe it was Newton. Jeff can tell me.
Yeah, we looked at the accessory dwelling units case study. We also looked at the mass.gov smart growth, smart energy ADU information. And I think you were correct, Kate, in saying Newton, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing it in my notes either, but I'm sure it's here someplace.
And I would have to say Newton's ordinance is much longer and more complicated with all kinds of hoops to jump through that seemed less necessary for us. It seemed like a lot more than we needed.
It was, we looked at Lexington.
Lexington.
We looked at Santa Cruz, California, Portland, Barnstable, Mass. So those were some of them, and that was right out of the case study from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Research, accessory dwelling units case study.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Send us that report. Can we get a copy of that report, Jeff? Can you circulate that report, the case study?
Yeah, or I might be able to, it might be easy. What I'll do is I'll provide Jeffrey with the link, because that's probably an easier way to get it to you all.
Okay, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you all set, Counselor?
Yep, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Thanks, counselors, and thanks to the planning board and Kate and especially Jeff and Jack who've been working on this, and you know, the city councils that we worked with to file this. I think a lot of this, you know, again, continuing the conversation, especially with Kevin, I think, you know, a lot of this is covered under the zoning already in that district, the DR district, which is why, again, it goes back to why we think this is the right zone to start this with. And again, I think it's about, once all those regulations are in place, it becomes more about the philosophy. I think that's Kate started with about the density. I know a lot of people start talking about the ability to rent it out or sell it, or have income from that. That is also a positive thing. But a lot of these are used, especially in communities, urban communities, for really aging in place. A lot of this has to do with, you know, a son or a daughter buying the home, having a place for their parent and having that relationship with grandparents, and especially as we know, a lot of grandparents are taking care of kids these days. So there's a lot of that sort of familial that comes with these ADUs that we've seen in other communities. So there is the ability to not just stabilize your income, but stabilize your family unit. And obviously, but there would be similar actions to supporting a first-time homeowner if they had this income as well. And all the regulations about the home, being built to spec and building permits, all that would stay the same. No one's gonna be building their own trench and allowing, no, the water department or the building department, planning board, we wouldn't, allow for someone to build their own sewer system in the middle of, our downtown sewer system. So, I mean, that, a lot of that's covered. Good questions to bring up, and we'll make sure it's cross-referenced. And again, if it's easier to bring that stuff back into this ordinance and respell it out, we can. But of course, it can be referred to through the ordinance and just last two questions. Again, I think it was brought up, but talk about the other zones, all those bigger area zones. I mean, they could divide those parcels out even if they have the frontage, right, to have an additional unit. So it's not about putting like a unit out, 2 acres away from your home. It really is trying to create that density and that aging in place, and perhaps some income to allow for first-time homeowners. And I think just the other thing, just not to correct Izzy in any way, Councilor Rivera in any way, but I think the net zero house is about how it's built. I think there still needs to be energy at the house to the home. I'm pretty sure it's totally not passive and creating its own energy at the house. We're not there yet. There is ways to do that, but it's about how the home is built. It had no effect on the environment the way it was built. So that's the story behind that tiny house, and the information's there. It's very, very cool. And yeah, it would have its own service. It would have its own, a meter from HG&E. It would have its own water bill. They would not be able to get natural gas if the natural gas moratorium is in place. So it doesn't circumvent. I guess that's the last thing I'll say. This wouldn't circumvent any of the current rules or regulations in place. So it's not like we're not gonna allow people to just do these things without the proper site plan review that we do anyways, building permits, all that good stuff. So again, if we want to incorporate a lot of that language and reference into the ADU ordinance, we can do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. And the reason I asked my question earlier was because there have been inquiries out in the RA zone from people who wanted to add an in-law apartment, say in the example that a couple or a parent is aging in place, and say in the example of wanting to sell the home or to their children, but remaining in the home. And so that was where my question was coming from. That's not an income-driven thing, but that is an aging in place consideration that people have sought in the past, and they were stymied by our ordinances in those examples. But this could, I mean, in my mind, if we're gonna open the door in this way, it could be perhaps opened in a similar way in other zones, but not identical, perhaps. But I do think it's a concept that is certainly a developing one and that people are warm to. I mean, in a way, we're kind of going back to the olden days where people kept building onto the house for each subsequent generation, right? But anyway, Councilor Rivera?
Thank you. It's funny you say that. In the olden days in Puerto Rico, they still do that. They build like you have a piece of land. There's like 5 houses on the same piece of land because the whole family built on that same piece of land. So I just wanted to thank Aaron for correcting me on that. That's the right information is the best information. Right? I didn't have exact information on it. I just know for a fact it was called net zero. My assumption was that we were saving energy. We were saving something though. But your point makes total sense, Councilor Bacon, and I think running a pilot through the DR where it's kind of already fit within the zone, people are already used to the congestion when you're living in spaces like that, can actually help with marketing it and selling it and setting it up for other zoning, and especially what you're saying in the RA zone. RA, if I'm correct, the RA zoning where it's like your parents are aging out, are aging, and you don't kind of want to have to put them in a home or put them somewhere else. That kind of makes sense too, as well, within those areas. Thank you.
So I'm not seeing any other hands, and it seems like this might be a good time to continue the public hearing. I don't know how much time this seems to be somewhat complex. So I don't know how much time urgency there is or how people want to handle the process on it. But I think for a first hearing, we've kind of covered what we can.
I don't know that there's a lot of time urgency, but I also, my personal perspective on it is that it's not that difficult, and if we could move forward on it quickly, it would be great. I mean, we have one tiny house waiting in the wings, and it would be great to start the work. And I don't know that it needs, there are a few tweaks that we've talked about here, and there are a few things that maybe people want to think about, how they want to, do they want to make a proposal to change it in some way, to add some stuff that we could consider, but I think we could move on it relatively quickly if we have a mind to do that. I don't think it's a lot.
Well, devil's in the details, as most things are. So, I'd like to see what comes of our discussion here, and as this draft continues to develop, and we do our due diligence, so whatever that takes. Yeah.
So I don't know, a month?
2 months?
I would ask is what other information are we waiting? I'm not trying to rush it either. I'm not trying to belabor it, but I just want to know if we're going to meet again in a month, what new stuff are we waiting?
So from
just
my,
to be prepared.
So what I heard were the questions relative to how the buffers would, as a practical matter, work, how the utilities and stuff would meet under the regs, the number of units, the special permitting authority, where that would be. There's a recommendation here, but that's a point of discussion. The other questions were one or more, depending. Is the notion that the owner would live there enforceable? Is that a real thing, or is that a thought, but we can't really put it in here?
I didn't raise it, but can't we make it a condition of the special permit? We make a number of.
But the question is it enforceable?
It's kind of already in the writing that they
It's
presented.
what we put in here,
Right.
and I think that our intention would be to have it be part of the special permit. I think there are other things that the city puts in special permits that probably aren't enforceable.
Right.
So whether
that was one of the
whether it's
questions.
entirely enforceable or not has not always limited what has been put into special permits. We put it there with the hope that it would be guidance that we could use. If we want to only put in things here that are completely 100% enforceable, we can get legal's opinion about that. But I also think that we can put, in my opinion, in my non-legal opinion, we can put things in here that are our intentions, even if we're not 100% sure about their enforceability.
Mhm. And we obviously need legal is going to begin to start drafting this into legal form. And as we continue to put more barnacles on the boat here and build it.
So my question was just so that way the ideas, and for me, the thought process is already laid out in my mind. And for that way, when we come back to the next meeting, I'm looking forward to the next steps, right? Not
Right.
just coming back to have the same conversation
Exactly.
again,
Right.
same talking points again. And
Right, and the other question was, are there state requirements in terms of a minimum size? So those are things that we need to know so that when we craft the ordinance, we're not going up against some other rule. So
And we have
those
the
would be
issues
the
around
things
utilities.
that it. So Attorney Degnan?
Yes, Counselor.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to see if you feel that you have enough information from what you've heard tonight to begin to draft a legal form, working from this draft, and then if you are able, in consultation with planning staff, to determine any, or at least some of the answers to the questions, like, is there a minimum size? Is there a minimum buffer that we should put in, regardless of what the average might be, that it would not ever be less than a number, per se? so that you have enough information to develop a draft in a month. Because I think we need to rely on you to give us some language back, but if you need 2 months, because I know you have a lot more to consider than what we're doing, then, you might want to let us know.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking the question, Madam Chair. I have not seen any of the documents that you have with respect to ADUs. So I would have to work with planning to get that information and start crafting it. So, yeah, I couldn't get it done in a month. Perhaps 2,
Okay.
working with the planning board.
Okay,
Oh,
that's fair.
so when's our meeting in 2 months?
Hang on,
Right,
we're
right.
getting there.
Exactly. I don't,
Paper season,
The 22nd.
final papers.
Thanksgiving is the 24th.
final exams, right? All that good stuff.
If we went in the normal pattern, it would be November 22nd. That might be a big vacation week for people, I don't know, but
Thanksgiving's that week.
it's,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I think we should avoid Thanksgiving week. People, yeah.
I think we'd be better off going to the 29th, since we have 5 Tuesdays.
Oh, all right.
Of
That's the week
November?
after.
No,
No, November
November.
29th, November. So this would be the Tuesday after
November
Thanksgiving.
29th, because we have 5 weeks.
All right, let's try
That's
that.
that's not a day that we have a planning board meeting scheduled.
So you want to do the 2nd, then
It
December
would be the
13th? All right, December 13th then.
Yeah, because the 27th, again, will be running into Christmas.
Yeah, we don't want
So
to.
why don't we go for December 13th for ordinance, and we won't meet on the 27th?
All right,
Okay, so December 13th,
make a motion to continue the public hearing to December 13th at 6:30.
Segundo.
is there a second?
Yep.
All in, oh.
Spanish version, the Spanish version of
I'll
second.
start speaking French, no. Okay, so, Counselor Givner, yes? I'm
Yes.
tabling to December 13th at 6:30. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Velez?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we are tabled to December 13th at 6:30
And
for
now
this
the
public hearing.
Planning board has to do the
Yep.
thing, yep.
Yes, and we are missing Sharon, who is usually our master of the schedule. But, Jeff, can you see offhand whether we have any real conflicts with continuing this to December 13th?
Well, we already do have a public hearing scheduled for that evening for the remand, so
Oh,
it's up
right.
to the planning board. That would be it.
I think my feeling is that it'll work if
Yeah,
if ordinance knows we will be joining them late in their
Yeah,
day.
that's fine, right?
okay.
We always have a full plate if you
We can
need-
do that.
You want to do later in the meeting or something?
Yeah, because we have a big
Yeah.
hearing that day.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, motion to continue this public hearing to December 13th?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Minnie, yes. Kate?
Yes.
Rosanna?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we are continued to the 13th.
Okay, so Chair will entertain a motion to open the public hearing for item 3.
So moved.
All in favor? Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Velez?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Jourdain?
Yes.
Givner?
Yes.
I think I heard you say yes, so, okay, so our public hearing is opened. This is a joint hearing with the planning board, that the city council create an ordinance that creates food truck zones in the city with the goals of eliminating food deserts, managing the locations, and promoting various neighborhoods. So I'll just wait till you get yours open.
Great. And I too would entertain a motion to open the public hearing for zoning text change to create food truck zones with goals of eliminating food deserts, managing the locations, and promoting various neighborhoods.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Mimi, yes. Rosanna?
Yes, ma'am.
Kate?
Yes.
Okay, we're open.
Okay, so just to sort of kick this off, we've been doing special permits, and I had filed an order that once a vendor had a special permit, they wouldn't need to come back in for a hearing each time to renew it, similar to home occupation. So in the context of that discussion came up the idea of sometimes the food trucks butting into other activities in certain areas, or maybe a festival that's going on. And then on the other hand, that perhaps there were areas in the city that could benefit from, say, more concentrated presence of food trucks. And so as we were talking about it, we came to understand that it really would trip into zoning, and so that we really needed to bring it up in the context of a public hearing and relative to zoning. And so for legal, I know at least our question is, how could we do this under zoning? Is it an overlay district? Is it a zone? What is it? We don't really know. But that's the concept that we were trying to consider. Counselor, well, let's see, you were the.
Well, yeah, me and.
We're all interested.
We're all in, I mean, we're all in favor of this, of the
I'm
concept.
just trying to defer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'll make it brief because I want to hear from Councilor Rivera. But
Jourdain and Counselor Velez.
the concept is, instead of, there's a number of public interests here that we're trying to serve. One is we want to protect our restaurants that spend all this money to have a restaurant and encourage development of having restaurants, particularly in the downtown, without worrying about somebody pulls up a food truck in front of your restaurant and you're saying, well, hold on a minute, I'm incurring all this expense to have a restaurant, and this person has none of these expenses that I have, so what's crazy about me? Why don't I have a food truck like them, and why have a restaurant? So there's that issue. Number two is we also want to be strategic in that what can we do to encourage food trucks to come to the city so that we're putting sources of high quality good food in neighborhoods that are underserved and don't have access to that food. Number three, we're also looking at it from an economic development perspective and perhaps as an attraction, i.e. what like New Haven does, where down on their coastline, you'll go there. I'm there literally every Saturday to see my son, and right along the water, there is probably 30, 40 food trucks all lined up right along the shore, and people come and they have a good time and enjoy the food trucks. So anyways, long story short, it was in that spirit, the conversations that we've been having. How can we do this? Is it zoning? What is our best mechanism to do? Because people are coming to us applying for permits to do these food trucks, and the thinking is, instead of just saying here, there, High Street here and a Maple Street here and a Main Street here, let's kind of think this all through together, and how can we come up with making this serve a number of these important purposes and other purposes that others might mention. So that's the spirit of this, and I'd be interested planning, you guys are the experts on this, to how could we do this and put some teeth on and bones on this? So I'll stop there.
Councilor Maldonado Velez?
Yeah, I just want to echo some of the things Councilor Jourdain said. I think that's the reason why we stepped into zoning is it's not necessarily that we believe zoning is the way forward, but it is the conversation is going to go there. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do, based on what we're saying, may involve zoning. If there's an alternate, a different way forward to like really create these like food truck food truck areas, district, whatever you want to call it, so that's really where this stands here. As far I know, the chair touched a little bit on the festival stuff. I think that's something that's come up in multiple different festivals, where it's just, there's an event happening at this place, but there's also a food truck vendor that has this place, like who takes precedence in this moment. Like there's just like those things are happening. I know I was just looking at like New Haven's permits, and it just says like if you may have your zone, but if there's a special event, you have to be invited for this event. You know, like those are things that are written into that. But I'm not sure that's something that we have and made clear in our ordinance. So again, it may not be zoning, but I think there's just food trucks are a huge opportunity, as we know, and particularly we have a lot of blight, we have a lot of fallen buildings, so it is cheaper. It is, even if you do want a restaurant, I mean, Crave is a perfect example where she started with a food truck and then eventually went into a brick and mortar. So there's huge opportunity there. How do we make sure and manage it in a way that one, the people in the community, one for sure know that this food truck is licensed and through Board of Health and all these other things, because I think one conversation has been coming up is that there are food trucks that are not necessarily going through the licenses and through the special permits and all that stuff. So how do we make sure that we're taking care of our community and saying, hey, they're preparing food in a safe way, this is good, like whether, I don't know if it's a sticker on the food truck or a list that the Board of Health has, that these are the legal permitted establishment or the food trucks. But yeah, I think this is an opportunity for like more food, as things go up, I think there's more food trucks that might be popping up, and I think we just want to, like anything else, just make sure we have a game plan in place.
Right.
Madam Chair.
I've got Counselor GIVNER in the queue on our side, but I'll defer to the planning board chair. She wants to recognize a couple of her people. Counselor GIVNER, you're next here.
Oh, thank you. Sure.
I was just
I
going to
don't
let
see
planning
Andrew.
go.
I'd love to speak. I can't raise my hand, really.
Okay, well, if it's our turn, then go ahead and speak, please.
I think it's great that this is before us. I'm totally supportive of both the idea of having more food trucks and also better regulating it so that it works for everyone. I worry that zoning is not the right place for this, because I think there's like, it's easy to talk about food truck zones, but I think that's a different use of the word zone than zoning, because in my mind, part of what's beautiful about food trucks, yes, we might be talking about creating specific locations where food trucks could go, but part of the beauty of food trucks is their adaptability and their the way that they can change with conditions. You know, there's a lot of construction happening in this area, so we want to have a lot of food trucks here, but maybe it's only for the next 6 months, right? And zoning is not going to help you with that. Zoning is clunky and slow and permanent. Now, it's not to say that I'm not happy to have planning be part of this conversation, and I would love to see this happen, but I don't know that creating zones through zoning in our zoning ordinances is really going to get what you want.
Well, I'm going to invite Attorney Degnan to jump in on this, because I don't know if the language of saying creating, and we originally said set an ordinance to create a zone. And so I don't know if the use of zone created some confusion. So maybe Attorney Degnan could jump in, but Attorney Degnan, we'll give you a couple minutes to think on that, because I want to recognize Counselor GIVNER, who's been patiently waiting. Counselor GIVNER?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little confused about the I guess the verbiage for what we're trying to do. I thought our intention was to designate areas for food truck vending, so that we would protect just the restaurants primarily, and also because we don't always know which of the food trucks are actually permitted, because we see more food trucks than we know have permits for food trucks in the city. So yeah, I guess I don't understand why we would need to have zones, or why we couldn't just designate some areas for food trucks, just so it makes it easier for us as a city to actually enforce, or, make sure that food trucks in certain areas have a permit, and if we see food trucks outside of those areas, we know they're not supposed to be there.
So Attorney Dagnan, we had originally been talking about creating the zones through ordinance, but then we understood we had to look at it through zoning. So now that you've heard a little bit more about the concept that we're thinking about, what is your view on where it could sit in our books?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the thing about zoning, it's not just indicating where things can go, it's also about where things can't go. And there's a lot of concern, and it's understandable, that we want to protect the stone and mortar and brick restaurants that have invested more in the city. And so whether you use the word zone or district, I'm not sure I understand completely why it would not be helpful. I thought that it might be. I mean, I'm not saying I'm married to the idea necessarily, but I think we do have to have locations where this, we're not going to allow this, and where we are going to allow this. I think that makes sense. But, maybe I can hear more from Kate as to why she doesn't think zoning is a tool that might help.
Now, I could be wrong about this. I don't know all the other ways that we have to regulate things in the city. It's enough to even begin to understand zoning, let alone everything else. But it seems to me that we have regulations through the Board of Health. We have permitting and we have a licensing department. There are a number of different things that allow for regulation of businesses. And my feeling about zoning, my worry is, as you said, zoning also excludes things. So if what we're doing is setting up zoning for food trucks, even if today we pick 3 areas that we think would be great for food trucks and we set up food truck zoning there, that sounds to me like you can't have food trucks anywhere else. And that's really problematic. Conditions about where we want food trucks and where it's useful for the people of the city to have access to food trucks could change a lot faster than it could take us to make a zone change.
So I guess my question is, does an overlay district play into this at all? I don't know much about them other than that there are a couple.
I mean, because my feeling, and this is my personal thought, having not thought it through in a lot of depth, but my feeling would be you want to have the possibility to have food trucks anywhere in the city. It's just you might want them here now and there some other place. Like, is it you're not ever going to want to have a food truck at Smith's Ferry? I think you might sometimes.
Well, and that's what
you
we're
might
doing
want a
now.
food truck near the mall. You might want, like, a food truck, in my mind, could be anywhere depending on the conditions. What are things like in fall 2027 in the city of Holyoke? I don't know. I can't predict that. And so we could set up an overlay district and figure out the rules for that, but I'm not sure that zoning's the right place for it. I could be convinced otherwise, but I'm thinking there's got to be some other better way to do it.
If I may.
I have Counselor, go ahead, Chair Banich.
Yeah,
And then I
we've
have
got
Counselor
Carolyn
Tessa
has
Murphy.
his hand up.
I'm all set then.
And
Yeah, I would just like to quickly point out that food trucks inherently imply that you're occupying the public way. So any discussion regarding potential food truck areas needs to involve the Department of Public Works and the city engineer. They're the experts on this matter.
Okay,
And,
thanks.
just to follow up briefly on Kate's point, I would worry a little about ending up with micro districts, because yes, I understand the need to protect our restaurants, but do we want to establish districts where there are food trucks, where we're discouraging restaurants from necessarily coming in because this is where the food trucks will be? Is that good for the neighborhood? Do we want to have zones that are carefully arranged so that they're not where the restaurants are? And in that case, are we encouraging the restaurants to cluster in ways that are going to be counterproductive? Or are we then going to be revisiting the zoning map every time a new restaurant opens up? And also, just generally, how is this different from an ice cream truck? Which, as far as I know, can go anywhere they feel
We
like.
don't do anything with those. But they move around. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and, you know, these are all things that maybe can be addressed, but I think we do have to think about them.
right.
And I understand that, Mimi. Usually the ice cream trucks, they drive all around. Food trucks, while they're mobile, they usually have a tendency to, I don't think they move around quite like an ice cream truck. But I understand that your points that you're making, and maybe we're talking about just indicating places where, or districts, for lack of a better word, where they could go. I heard the point being mentioned that we'd want a food truck everywhere in the city. Well, I don't know, do we? That's a legitimate question, I think. But,
Let me help you with that.
Right.
So I just wonder whether we're better
Right.
off with a special permit solution, much as I hate special permits.
Well,
go full
I didn't
circle.
mean to apply like everywhere in the city all the time, but you can imagine, like, there's a park in my neighborhood that, you know, for a week when there's a festival at the park, it might make sense to have a whole bunch of food trucks there. Not every day, all the time, but I don't want to set up a situation where you can't have a cluster of food trucks. And it's
For an
certain
event.
times when it makes sense.
Right.
And my guess is licensing but I don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know enough about the other
So we're just trying to
areas.
think out loud and figure out what to do. And maybe we could just encourage it rather than prohibiting it. We could do something that would encourage it somewhere that we think is good. Counselor Tessa Murphy-Ramboletti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I feel like I just have a unique perspective to bring to this conversation that I'm so glad is happening. Because most of you know, I work with small businesses directly, a lot of whom are food trucks. And I also had the opportunity when I worked at the city's Planning and Economic Development Office to help food trucks try and navigate the permitting process in our city. And so I think what I love about the spirit of this order is that we're recognizing that it's not super easy to get permitted. And, you know, we have all talked about there's food trucks out there that are not properly permitted. And just in my experience, a lot of the time, that's because it's super confusing and it's not exactly clear on who's the authority, the proper authority, and who's gonna make the decision on the location. So, you know, years ago, if I remember correctly, the responsibility shifted from being in the city clerk's office to being in the DPW. And there wasn't really a lot of implementation on that end. And this was years ago. But my point being that I think to file order have started a really important conversation that is less about zoning and more about policy and what our policy is going to look like so that we have a clear set of directions for someone who wants to have a food truck, and that they know here's the places you can't go, right? So you can't go in front of someone else's business or, you know, whatever, if there's a buffer zone or something, but that it's super clear. And, you know, I think that's something that, you know, maybe it's filing a new order that would change the current permitting process as it is. I'd be happy to help with that conversation, you know, follow up with the planning office or economic development or the license board. But I think that this conversation is super important because the reality is that it's not super clear, and the clearer that we can make it for not just the business owners, but also city departments so that everyone's on the same page, I think that's the great thing that's going to come from this conversation. And so while I don't think it's a zoning thing, I do think we have to take a look at the current licensing and just what exists and why. So I just wanted to throw that out there, put in my 2 cents, and just, thank everyone for their thoughts on this.
So anyway, just to clarify, the reason that we're talking about zoning is because the discussion that took place in ordinance was around location, which is the only thing city council approves, is the location of the food trucks. All the other permitting is done through the Board of Health and others. So all the safety concerns and all the proper preparation of the food is addressed by others. But the questions that have come up before us are around the location. So we are happy. We were originally going to pursue an ordinance change or some kind of ordinance language to perhaps encourage a food truck area, maybe. But we understood that we needed to pursue zoning. So, Attorney Degnan, I just want to circle back to you because if we can accomplish what we're talking about without changing zoning, I think that was the original intent of the committee. But if you feel that there is a reason that we do need to do something through zoning, I guess we need some help as to know what that would be.
Yes, and I understood and I heard all the points made here, even about, and I think Tessa brought up some good points. And I agree. There is other tools that we have, like you said, the Board of Health. There's other matters of regulation, but it doesn't address the question of what the city council is dealing with, and that is location. And perhaps we could get away with it without doing zoning. I've heard all of the issues as to why people think it's not, but we would, I think, we have to come up with some type of ordinance language, that would get us where we want to go, and that's maybe setting forth where these trucks can go, and talk about how we could make it clear, because Tess had mentioned that some of these folks are having difficulty getting licensing. But to answer your question, Madam Chair, I think we can, after hearing everything, I think we can get around zoning, but I think we do have to put together an ordinance that would get to where you want to go and address the issue that Tessa had mentioned too. So it's kind of like two things, location and then regulation. And maybe the regulation wouldn't apply to city council. Maybe that's something we'd be having to talk with Board of Health. I'm not sure about that. But the short answer to your question is, yes, I think we can do an ordinance now based on what we've heard that we're not looking to amend our zoning ordinance.
Okay, so now I've never had this particular situation before. So if we find then that we don't need to continue the public hearing, and I do want to make sure I put it out to the public, if there's anybody on Zoom that wants to speak on this, that they're able to do that. Oh, okay. But should we all agree that we don't need to pursue zoning, then it would seem we would just close the public hearing without a finding and keep it in ordinance? I mean, procedurally, I'm asking, I guess.
I think our better move in that regard might be, let's continue. I think we're sort of walking through a cave with a candle at this point, and we're kind of figuring it out. At the moment, it seems like we're going towards an ordinance, but if we at least keep the process, maybe what we do is we file another order that says create an ordinance, and we have two parallel tracks, and then if we ultimately change course and we go ordinance, then we just let this one go. And then if on the other hand, next meeting we say, gee, I really thought that a lot more, we better have this as zoning, then we go that direction. That would be my recommendation.
Well, so if, and Aaron, I see your hand. Did you want to update us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quickly, I think that a couple of things, because you kind of unpacked a lot of different things in the conversation. So first off, when we talk about food deserts, it's really about access to healthy foods in neighborhoods and communities, and so we do a lot of work with the Mass in Motion coordinator, and we have our new Mass in Motion coordinator now with us with a new grant, a new cycle. So that's a lot of focus when we talk about food deserts. So it's good to have the city council. I know a lot of you are involved with social justice issues around food insecurity and food access. So, our work with the Food Bank of Western Mass and the mobile markets, and of course, everything that JR and the Chamber does with the farmers market. So we're really trying to work on addressing that issue. And I think the last 2 points, I really think to make sure we talk about, the regulations or the ordinance about this, we need to have, Sean in here for sure. It's already going on, right? So as was pointed out earlier, I think Jack pointed out too, if the food truck is inspected and, passes the Board of Health permitting process, if they're going to locate in the city, they got to work with the DPW on their location, if it's on city property, which they usually are. And, unlike an ice cream truck, they're not usually driving around. And then also a lot of the food trucks are event-based, so, whether it's on Race Street or Main Street or High Street or, at some of the businesses, throughout the city, a lot of our food trucks go to businesses. They have analytics labs, or the cannabis industry or some of the manufacturers will have these food trucks on their property, for lunch for the employees for a special event. To Kevin's point, Councilor Jourdain's point, setting up an area, we talk a lot about that, about some of the temporary uses for the vacant lots, especially now with our TDI fellow on High Street, with the focus on High Street. Can we utilize some of these temporary lots for food truck pop-ups, pocket parks for people to eat to support the established restaurants as well, having places for people who are leaving Kind Eli's in the Colombian restaurant or grabbing a burger at Brennan's but want to eat outside. So we're definitely having that conversation as well. And then the last point, is I think that Sean and the DPW, and we do a good job of, promoting our restaurants, making sure everything's, inspected and legal. If you hear, all this word of mouth, we're focusing, I know Jack and Alexandria, we're focusing with the mayor and the Flex Squad on some of the non-permitted car uses in the city. If you know of unlicensed food trucks giving out food, let the Board of Health know. I just want to make sure that people aren't just thinking it's a Wild West out there. Most of these food trucks are licensed. If you're having an event, and you're having a food truck at your event, you have to make sure they're licensed with the city. You can't just bring a random food truck into the city. So just making sure those lines of communication are open, because we're definitely, when we're working with the mayor and the Flex Squad and all the enforcement agency departments, we're trying to address these kind of things, make sure everyone's on the same playing field, make sure that everyone's getting their permits, everyone's paying the right taxes and getting the right, everything they need to do regulatorily. So just making sure that we have that communication, because just the word of mouth about, oh, this food, I hear that food trucks aren't licensed. We want to make sure that we're addressing that, so there's not a sort of reputation out there that's the case, and encourage that kind of behavior, because I think there is a good process in place. And Sean is, there's a couple of food trucks that, haven't passed their inspections and are still working with Sean and the department to get licensed. So it's not like they're just handing them out. So just want to make sure, I know Sean wasn't here tonight, but happy to continue those conversations. But there is kind of 3 buckets you kind of address, right? The food insecurity, the economic development aspect, if we were to have areas to allow temporary food truck setups, but also making sure that we're working together, make sure they're all playing on the same level playing field.
Right. And some of the confusion that is coming up relative to licensing is that what we do in terms of the location of the food truck is called licensing of their location, which is not the same as them being permitted for the food safety. And so I think that's where the language is creating confusion, because in the context that we're using the word license, it doesn't mean what people think it means, right?
And we can work with you on that, especially now, as we prepare for the spring, when food trucks are more prevalent in the summer months. We did at the beginning of this year, we worked with all the departments and, my staff, specifically the clerks, and Marie specifically, one of our newest additions on the staff. We put together an outdoor dining guide. Right, so we put all the regulations, all the different permits, all the different contacts in one little guide. So for people who want to do outdoor dining, we're doing the same stuff, for food trucks and other things. So we are trying to make the process at least, if not easier to navigate, at least the map understandable what you have to navigate.
Right. And I really do think it would be clearer if the role that we played as the council simply said that we approved the location. And then I think a whole lot of the discussion would be, or the problematic part of it would be gone. But we'll work on that.
I have one question.
Councilor Rivera?
Do we have a list of all the food trucks and their locations?
Ask the Board of Health.
The Board of Health has
See, we
a
only
list
do the ones on public
of all the
streets.
food trucks and the locations?
Right, but
Locations are determined by the DPW.
So then,
DPW determines the location based on public safety.
right, but
because I remember somebody randomly popping up on High Street that never came through us. And I brought it up towards, like, I asked the mayor about it, and he had told me that they got permitted through the state. And they were able to still, like, so you don't have to go through the Board of Health to get permitted, right? Like, if
No,
you
you
get
do.
Well, I was told, I'm telling you what I was told, that he got permitted through the state, right? And that he discussed locations with certain people and he got the permit he needed
so,
without
He
going
didn't
through.
get the local permits he needed.
Well, that was my question, but
Right.
when a cop went to ask him, he had what he needed. So, I mean, it is what it is.
so here's the thing, we're supposed to be approving the location on the public streets here in city council. DPW can be approving use on city property, and private companies can have whatever they want on their private property, right? Because if the food truck has their food permits, we're only looking at them for where they are located on the public street here in city council. When they come in and they want to be in front of 139 High Street, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., that's us. The other ones are the other departments, but their food safety is through the Board of Health. Yeah. Kate? Oh, no, you didn't. I'm sorry. I'm looking at you saying Kate,
It
Rosanna.
sounds like there's a little bit confusion because I'm hearing what Jack is saying and I'm hearing what Councilor Rivera is saying. So maybe if somehow we can incorporate DPW in an email, send them something. What are the regulations? What role they play in, just for clarification? Being that we're gonna set a tone moving forward when it comes to food trucks. Because what is the difference of having, because also it's lack of education and knowledge, right? Because maybe he presented something to the police officer that says Board of Health, permit, not realizing that it was something not pertaining to the city itself. So I think there might have been just lack of information, right? If you don't know, you don't know. So maybe somehow we can communicate with DPW and just ask that question. I don't know who would be in charge of that. Just, hey, when it comes to food trucks, what is your position? Like, what is the requirement? And also involving the Board of Health as well, to see how they're connected.
So our administrative assistant, Jeffrey, is listening. And so Jeffrey, if I could put that on your list of things to do, to reach out to DPW so that we can end up with a comprehensive list. Because I do think that's where a lot of the confusion is coming from. Council Maldonado, VELEZ.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just, I don't know where I read it earlier, but I think Councilor Rivera does make a good point, because I was reading somewhere around like state licensure. I'm not saying that they shouldn't get the local, but I think there is that miscommunication, that disconnect between, well, if I'm licensed by the state, I don't have to go through all these other things at the Holyoke level. Because there are other communities where if you are licensed at the state, the process is so much simpler. It can be as easy as like, hey, I'm going to be here. So like, I know the process in Holyoke is very different and much more time consuming. Just as far as like departments I'm reading, Sean is not here, but I know in one of our conversations, that we had, he mentioned, you know, any person that comes to Board of Health, that should be the last stop and they should know where to go next with everything. So just looking at the food truck application that is created here, he did create the departments that need to be contacted. But I think even then it's still not 100% clear. So for example, it says, please remember to contact city clerks. Gives a number, and then it says your application needs to be seen by city council. But it's, you know, there's like, if you're outside, there's not disconnect between city clerk, city council. But licensing board, DPW, police department, fire department, and the city clerks, those are the 5 departments that have a say into licensing, I guess, for food trucks. So I think inviting all 5 of them to our next conversation, just seeing like what their process is, would get a lot of clarity going forward. So I just wanted to put those 5 in there for Jeffrey if he's reaching out.
thank you. And
So,
Jeffrey, I hope that helps you.
And one last thing, Madam Chair. Also on here, I know we keep talking about ice cream trucks, but there's two different types of license. There's the open air vendor license, which is fixed area, you won't be moving around. But then there's also a hawkers and peddlers license. So I'm not sure if the ice cream truck needs to get that license, but like the ice cream truck should also be having some sort of licensing, I think. Yeah, so just wanted to put out there.
I don't know about that.
so if I may at
So,
this point.
Chair Panich?
Yes, all of this is obviously extremely relevant to the basic problem of food trucks. And at the same time, clearly this is now a discussion about what the city could do that does not involve zoning. And this makes me think that perhaps we should go back to the question of where we go from here and whether we want to close this public hearing or take up Councillor Jourdain's suggestion that we just hold it open because no one wants to have to re-advertise it if it turns out that we need it. But is to figure out a date where you can bring us back if you need us and continue the conversation about licensing if, it turns out you don't. But moving along from here simply because it's 10:15 and we're about to hit legal drop dead date for time.
Right.
So,
What's our thinking, a month?
I would go out to the December date, and
Oh, the 13th
even
again.
then,
Okay.
that's, I think that's too close almost, because
Why?
Too close to now? I think December
if we
13th.
don't need zoning, we can just work through ordinance
Okay.
in October and November,
Okay.
and then it's Christmas, so I don't know.
December 13th. I mean, we don't want to push it off forever.
All right.
Well, except that if you do turn out to need us, we really should not add anything else to December 13th, particularly if it's going to be a lengthy discussion. We've got a big hearing, and we also have the previous thing we continued on ADUs.
Right.
So I have a thought. If we continue to December 13th, and you continue to a date further out, like
That works.
February, right? If we need you, we will know by then. And if we don't, we should know by then. Right? And we can continue to December. And also keep working on the ordinance, whichever way we're going to go with establishing this food truck area. I don't think it'll stop us from doing anything.
If we come back to this, though, we'll be limited to February. If it turns out that we do need to do zoning, then we wouldn't, if you guys didn't take it up on December 13th, we would be stuck until February, which is an awfully long time. I mean,
Right, but the food truck season,
okay,
won't be till May, April and May.
okay.
I don't know.
If you think we can, that's fine, all right.
I mean, I don't know.
January?
January, I heard January. I think that's good. Yeah, I agree. I think it'll give us enough time. Like if it does need to be a zone, I think we can work that language out by the 13th so that February it's not more conversations. Like there should be the zoning by then. But I think
January's better than February.
January I think would be better.
All right, January. What are our dates for January? I don't
I
see.
thought we would, well, we can stay in December.
But why? I think we do everything together on these, right? So it's either
Well,
it
I'm
is what
just
it is.
saying,
Right?
if we don't need it, we open and we close.
I think it makes sense to us continue. Well, that's just my personal opinion. For us to continue December 13th, find out if we need them or not.
Right.
Okay.
And then go. Because what you said does make sense, where we do two different
Yeah.
paths.
Okay.
And then if it works.
All right, December 13th.
path.
You've convinced me.
I would maybe propose we say January 10th, if we're going to say January. It's our first meeting. Are you meeting then?
So I need a motion,
Motion to continue to December 13th at 6:30.
and all in favor, Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Maldonado Velez?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon, yes. Counselor Jourdain?
Yes.
Counselor GIVNER?
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, so we need a motion to continue, and January 10th sounded like it would work, you know, which Kate
My,
has proposed.
my question, I guess, was, is ordinance meeting that day? In case you need us. We don't want to set ourselves up to come back on a day when you aren't actually meeting.
Do we have a meeting on that day?
We don't normally, but we could.
Well, we can also come back on a day when you do have a meeting.
Exactly.
Oh, so the Tuesday would be the, oh, wait. Hang on, right, getting the right year. Yeah, we wouldn't typically meet, but we could.
Well, our planned
We don't
days in
normally meet on the
that
second
January are the 10th and the 24th.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The 10th we would meet.
We have met occasionally on the second Tuesday, and we're going to meet on the second Tuesday of December, which we've established. But this is all, we will know, I think safely we'll know by December 13th if we're in a zoning arena or if we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are, we can decide to have a meeting on the 10th, on the 13th. And if we're not, we're done. Right? Right. So if
Yeah,
you
we
go
can
to
certainly-
January 10th,
We can go to January 10th,
and we
and
need
if you don't
to-
need us,
we
we
can.
open and close.
Sure.
Right.
All right, I move that we continue this hearing to
Right.
January the 10th, 2023 at 6:30.
Second.
All in favor? Mimi, yes. Kate?
Yes.
Rosanna?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we are continued until January 10th. Happy New Year.
I know, we've covered all the holidays tonight. All right.
All right, so that takes care of item 3. for
Yes,
this
so
evening.
thank you all.
Appreciate it, planning board.
Can I, logistically, are you all finished?
No.
No, we have one more
Okay.
item.
Can I just ask our chair what we would like to do? Are we, because we still have items on our agenda also? Are we
Well, I think if
leaving and
ordinance-
reconvening, or?
Now, if ordinance doesn't need us, I would suggest that we leave and reconvene and get through the rest of our agenda, unless people are desperate to leave, in which case, you know, if we don't have a unanimous agreement to keep going in 8 minutes, we're done for the night.
It's just that Rosanna and I have to walk all the way back up there. Which we can do if you need it. We can do.
Well, what do you think, Jeff?
I'm not sure if the staff is willing to.
Well, so at this point, all we've got to do is go through basic planning board business, discuss the upcoming schedule. We were going to offer conference committee reports, updates, and there were 2 sets of minutes for you to review and presumably approve. So I'll throw it back to the board. Do they find that that's weighty enough to want to continue, or do you want to?
We can come back up there if you all are willing to stay.
Yeah.
Let's do it. We'll see you up there.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Thank you all.
Take care now. Thank you.
We have,
Motion to take up item 5.
is there a second?
Second.
All in
All right.
favor? Counsel Rivera? GIVNER, aye.
Yes.
Velez, aye. Vacant, aye. Jourdain, aye.
Yes.
Item 5, ordered that street vendors who have received a license may be granted a renewal of the license for the same location without a hearing when all required approvals are presented with the application and any required fees, taxes are paid. Now, I had filed this for the people that are in the places. It's not problematic. Every year they have to come in for another hearing, so they wouldn't have to do that once they were there, and like a home occupation. We got some legal language on it to accomplish that, but then our discussion went into the food truck zones and some areas where there was some conflict. Now, we can address areas of conflict under a special permit for a location, because even if we granted it, if we then have a complaint, we can have a hearing, regardless of what we do, or we can just leave it alone. But I think from the discussions that we're having, even if we do set up a zone where we're trying to encourage the food trucks to go, it doesn't sound like we're really going to prohibit them anywhere. So we would still keep this aspect going in
No,
terms
but
of,
I think the vision is we're gonna put them in some places and we're not gonna put them in other places. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. I think that's the whole point. And
but we
as
can
far as-
accomplish that through the special.
But I think I think this is premature to come to a decision on 5 yet, because we have to answer the question where they're gonna go, and then maybe part of the answer is, once we say this is where everybody goes, then if you go there, you're good. You may not even need to come to us for a permit, because we're saying this location is always okay, or with whatever parameters we say.
All right.
You just need to get your Board of Health permit and your other
Yeah.
permits, but this location is always approved.
I would
Right,
also,
right.
I would
right.
also
I
like.
hear you on that,
I
but
would also like to make an amendment, if anything, if like someone complains or neighbors
Mm-hmm.
complain or whatnot, that it, you know what I'm saying? It requires that, yes, you have to represent your case
Yes.
all over
Right.
again to us.
yes, if there's a
Um,
complaint.
If there's a complaint,
Yeah.
or if there's any issues where you have paid your
Concerns.
taxes or whatever it is, I don't know what it is, whatever type of
Right,
concern
the
there
same
is.
thing that we do for home
But-
occupation. I'm happy to table it though, because we're gonna be working on the other stuff.
I have no issues with that as well, but
I'm-
it just didn't read that in that
No, no,
statement
no,
there, so I wanted to just make sure that was.
But no, and I'm warm to that, and I've got a note on it to that effect, and I'm happy to keep it tabled, because like I say, we're not having people coming in for them now anyway.
Right.
So there's no rush. But I would like to keep it alive, because I don't think we're gonna, on the other hand, prohibit a food truck from ever going somewhere else,
Different spots.
right? So,
I'm interested.
anyway.
I know it was, Madam Chair, thank you. I was reading earlier, I mean, if I were to get a license in September, June 30th, based on what I'm reading, is the sort of the expiration date for all licenses. So and I think this is a conversation with Sean where it's like, we're presented a list every June 30th or every new fiscal year with the vendors that are, just to make that easier, because it is on the application, it says June 30th is the day that you're supposed to renew your license.
Oh, okay.
So I think, I think there are some things that we have set up, that people have set up in the past. We just have to follow it and make it clearer, so.
Okay. But I'm okay with tabling this till we can bring the two together, as far as that goes.
Motion to table item 5?
Second,
All in favor, Counselor Rivera?
Yes.
Counselor Velez?
Yes.
Bacon, yes. Jordan?
Yes.
Givner?
Yes.
Tabling 5.
motion to adjourn.
To adjourn, second.
All right.
I'll go to a motion to adjourn, that's fine.
Oh, well,
We're done, right?
Well,
well,
we had
do
some
have-
info, I
we
think.
do have item 7.
Seven.
Oh, yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Let's
My
make
bad.
a motion to take
Nah,
7
nah,
off
yeah,
the
yeah.
table, but
Is there
I
a
thought that was the
second?
last one. You guys said
Second.
there's one left.
Yeah,
Second, yes.
Counselor Rivera, yes.
Yes.
Counselor Velez, yes. Bacon, yes.
Jordan,
Jordan, yes. Givner? Yes, we're taking up 7?
Yes.
Okay. Item 7, that city ordinances regarding vacation leave be amended to add language that the city may credit a new employee with additional paid vacation time based on relative prior employment experience. We tabled it at the last meeting for more information relative to the who, the what, the how much, the how many.
Yep.
And I think we also had some questions about cost and impact of if we changed it. And I expressed that my initial understanding was for people who'd worked for the city before, not opening it up to every new potential applicant and leaving it wide open, but that's me. Personally, I just want to see some more information relative to costs. And I think the thing that we're not looking at, and Councilor Jourdain has raised this point perhaps in a little different way, or maybe exactly the same way. We keep talking about one benefit or another benefit, and we've changed pay, we've changed a number of things over the years, and I think we really need HR to tell us what is the job worth when you factor in the pay, the pension, the time off, and everything else. Because everybody says private sector pays more. Well, private sector doesn't give 12 holidays, because I worked in the private sector. I think we got 6. Things like that. So we have to start looking at the total cost of these benefits, not one at a time, somebody's getting more or less. The takeaway that I had of the information that we were provided was that the people who've been here a really long time get more vacation, and the people who've been here only a short time had less. I mean, that was the general theme. And so I don't know how people feel about it if they've worked somewhere for 20 years and they got up to their 4 or 5 weeks, and then they're gonna be working in the department with somebody who worked somewhere else for 20 years, and now they come in and they're getting what they got. Now, I understand the argument that they have the same amount of years, but they weren't working here. So I just think it's a bigger question than just simply the amount of vacation, because it's not totally apples to apples to me. So I would like to see some more cost information and a little bit more comparatives on the other aspects, I guess. But I'll defer to the committee's wishes.
Yeah,
So,
I think, again, we're still in the information gathering stage, Madam Chair. I'd like to get a draft copy of the proposed ordinance too. I think there was one copy given to you, but I don't believe.
I don't think we have any language.
Oh, no, we don't have any language? Oh, okay.
No, because we haven't requested
Oh, okay.
legal form.
Okay, all right. So I thought they had
Well, hang
taken,
on.
I thought they had taken the liberty to draft
Well,
something
hang
up,
on, and I will
actually.
look to be sure I'm not misspeaking.
Yeah, I think you may be misspeaking, because I saw something that alluded to, we're gonna give everybody up to 5 weeks, and they.
Hang on.
And I had raised a procedural question, which is, the law department technically is not supposed to be independently drafting ordinances that are not requested by the committee.
Well, right, and I clarified that at a recent meeting.
Yes.
That we were going to return to the normal way of doing business that had
Yes.
kind of gotten away from us.
But there is circulating around, I haven't been provided a copy yet, but I hope all the committee members are provided a copy of the draft ordinance that's circulating on this item. I think it would be, in
Well, I will
in
look-
fairness to all involved, we all have the same information. I would ask the solicitor to share that with everybody. Or share it with the committee first at the
But
next meeting.
I don't believe I have a draft legal
Yeah,
form.
yeah. There is one, and I remember seeing it, and it said specifically
Hang on.
up to 5 weeks and all of this other stuff. It was
Well, let me double check, because
Okay.
if I do have it, I'm totally willing to share it.
right.
I'm not the,
For the sake of time, though, I'm just going to kind of move on from
who's
that.
even the maker of this order?
Todd. But the other question is, okay, so we got now some of the names and whatnot, but we don't know, like, okay, well, what would all of this cost if their law department's proposal had actually come to pass? And then I don't think it's really reasonable to compare, this situation to the patrolmen's union or something, or some of these the DPW supervisors are getting 42 days off. Hey, I'm not sure that's an industry standard, but what also don't they get? Are these guys getting? Some of these people get paid very, very little. DPW laborers, so it's all a balance. But I noticeably, what I found very intriguing was the Professional Supervisors Association has vacation almost identically consistent with what the current ordinance is, which to me tells you volumes. That the Schedule A, otherwise known as these employees, are getting the same benefits for vacation leave as the Professional Supervisors Association. So I don't see how they're being disadvantaged in any way, number one, but I would like to see what the cost of this would be, because I would assume now if you're going to do this for them, you would have to do this for the professional supervisors. And for that matter, wouldn't you have to do that for everybody? I mean, I come in as a patrolman. Maybe I was a state cop using their logic, maybe I was a state cop for 5 years, or I was in a corrections officer for 10 years, and then I get a job as a Holyoke cop. This is saying that we're going to leave it up to the mayor to, which is, by the way, in the draft ordinance that we can't seem to find now that I've visually laid eyes on, that, you know, just the mayor picks. I like Izzy, you get 5 weeks. You know, I don't like Jose, he gets 2 weeks. You know, it seems very arbitrary now. No. I said a hypothetical mayor, not me. But it would be just one of these situations where, like, I want a set of rules that's like for everybody, and that you come in like, this is your health insurance, this is your vacation, this is your, you know, whatever all your other benefits are. It isn't like totally random, you know, based on that, because that does not sit well. And by the way, I thought it was kind of curious that if you notice these private sector benefits of these a couple examples, we're certainly not disadvantaged compared to some of these people. That's for sure. Because, by the way, none of these people get pensions. So I would note all that. And I think when next we gather on this topic, because there's still a lot to wade our arms through on this, is we should have, you know, Kelly come in from personnel and discuss some of this too. I mean, it seems like this discussion is happening outside of having the personnel director. She's our lead person in all of this. And, you know, she should be our go-to person, sort of shepherding the football, whatever we're going to do on this. I think personnel should be weighed in on this. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Madam Chair. So just a point with regards to like the benefit piece, although when you retire, or if you get the 80%, or if you reach the 20 years that you have to reach, it's really, really hard. Yeah, the document's there. It's really, really difficult to make it to that 80%, just for people to understand, like with that benefit. Yeah, we did. So with that benefit, like it's rarely the occasion that people get the actual 80% when they retire, right? Like I've seen people retire and then pass like a year after, not even get to enjoy the money that was put into the pot for so many years. But I hear the point, like the benefits are different, and it's to another level. So for me, at first, when I first heard it, it kind of like was a slap in the face real quick, because working in the school department, having my wife just come off maternity leave, not paid the whole time on maternity leave 2 times, and then you don't actually have the opportunity to accumulate vacation time because you get the vacation times with the students. You don't have the opportunity to really accumulate sick days because you only get the 6 or 7 throughout the year. And if you're sick and you have to stay home with your kids because you have kids, then you don't actually get to accumulate the time. So for me, it's like, if we're talking about city employees across the board, like the school department employees get the worst end of the stick out of anybody at the end of the day. School department employees get the worst end of the stick at the end of the day. You're a paraprofessional, do not get pregnant because you're not going to get paid throughout your time. So like, and they're probably the lowest paid. So that was the part to me that stuck out the most when I heard this come up. Whereas like, if you guys are advocating for this, then why aren't you advocating for all the teachers and all the paraprofessionals and all the cafeteria workers, janitors, and everyone else? But at the same time, the times have changed. People, the power has kind of gone to the worker to a certain extent, right? I want to see what Kevin said, where it's a scale and everyone is matched to that scale, but the scale may have to look like some time gets added to their vacation time. But as long as it's the same scale for everyone, right? Although we have to also understand that 20 years working here should afford you a good, decent vacation time, but we do live in a merit system. That's the reality of what it is. People go get their masters and PhDs so they can have the extra vacation time. If you're not offering that up, they're going to go somewhere else that will give that to them. I'm not saying that we should give them precedent over someone that was over 20 years, but at the end of the day, we have to recognize that. That's the system we've developed in our society, that meritocracy system. So in a sense, we have to kind of provide the mayor somewhat of a mechanism for him to be able to use that. Again, I'm not saying that I'm in agreement with what was put forward, 110%. But I do understand where it's coming from, and I get the idea of where if we want to attract talent or keep talent, then those are some things that we might have to work on. How does it look? I don't know. And should it be uniform across the board for everyone to be fair? Yes, I agree with that, because I don't do the picking and choosing either. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
My general thoughts on this particular ordinance is just I think it goes into that, like being able to pick and choose. I think it does give the mayor the opportunity to sort of like, I don't know, like what we're doing, trying to get people in here by using certain either raising their wage or like just trying to like what other ways can we get people in here. But I think there also opens up an opportunity to start playing favorites. And then the conversation for me, it's like we have someone that may be a janitor for 20 years and now is doing not a director role, but still has worked that role for, does that mean they start, even though it's a low paying position, that doesn't necessarily have to go to the mayor to be hired? Does that mean they have to start at this, like the minimum vacation, even though they've worked that same role for 20 plus years or whatever? So that, I think we all agree that this is not going to be figured out today, but that's my first concern with that. It's just, we do want to give the mayor more opportunity to be able to advertise and market these jobs and make it pretty for people to, but this one, this may open up more issues than what we're trying to create. So.
Right. Can I add on to that? Because I think, Jose, I think both Councilor Maldonado, Velez, and Councilor Rivera are spot on in that. My also thing that we need to be sensitive to is, hey, I put in my 20 years. I've earned my 5 weeks. And now, hold on a minute. Joe Blow is coming in here and, oh, he's all set. He gets 5 weeks day one. You know, I mean, what kind of message does that send? Because really, the people that are over 10 years, you're pretty much good because you're going to get 4 or 5 weeks under the current system. Now, what is impacted is the newbies coming in. They're going to be coming in not at 2 weeks. What they're trying to create is a system for the newbies that you come in 4 or 5 weeks. And I'm saying is, well, hold on a minute. What about all these people that work 10 years or more? And now the question is, you know, we should just be careful with that because now, you know, professional supervisors union is going to turn around and say, well, hold on a minute. We got the Section A, the one that we're talking about debating here. They're going to be like, well, hold on a minute. I want that.
Well, that's why we have to see what the impact.
There's a lot, you're opening a big can of worms that we just need to consider all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, to go back to the draft. So the draft that you're referring to.
Can you circulate that to me?
You have it.
I do?
Yes, because
Okay.
it was sent.
We lost your microphone.
Sorry, I had shut it off for some reason. So, Jeffrey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you circulated this to us before our last Ordinance Committee meeting.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. My
Okay.
apologies. I did
Okay.
circulate it before August 23rd and just forgot to bring it forward for this meeting.
Okay,
That was
because,
my mistake.
because I was pretty sure we had it in front of us because I believe that was one of the reasons that I made a request to legal that they not draft things in legal form until the committee requests it in the regular order of doing business as we have in the past. So, I thank you for that clarification because I was pretty sure we all had it. But I will. As the chair, I have not entered into separate and private conversations with any department head to put forth any ordinance changes, ever, for the record.
Good.
And I will send this to you, Kevin, and I'm sure when you do a search, you will find it.
Madam Chair, no,
Yes,
I don't mean to
Councilor
cut you
Rivera.
off, but I am going to motion to table the item.
Second.
And, yeah.
You don't need to convince us.
Yes. All in favor? Councilor Rivera?
Yes.
Councilor Velez?
Yes.
Bacon, yes.
Yes.
Jourdain, yes. GIVNER?
She's probably gone.
Yes.
Okay.
So item 7 is tabled. Now, we've jumped all over the place, so don't.
we did
check
finish
To be sure we've done everything.
Okay.
and
We got it
I
all
haven't
in there.
missed anything.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, Counselor Rivera.
Yes.
Counselor Velez. Yes. Bacon, yes. Jourdain.
Yes.
Givner.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, Attorney Degnan.
Thank you.
Have a
Attorney
good
Degnan.
night, anybody and everybody who's left.
Thank you.